Trainer and consultant is about the topic of change. And so what I'd like to do is to give you some tools, and we're going to talk a little bit about players. So as we get into this, I know that many of you, particularly in smaller libraries, have different roles. And so I'm assuming that as we go through the material, not everything that we talk about applies to everyone in every role in a library. But I hope that you think about how change is not just affecting you personally, but the people you work with and for in your library as well. If you want to make sure that you have your handout, it's entitled Change in Libraries, and the page 1 says Change in Libraries, and page 18 on the back of the handout says Ethics is Everyday Virtue. And sometimes people ask me why I'm including ethics in the work that I do in change. And I tell people that change in an institution is very much like remodeling a house and checking out how good the foundations and the load-bearing walls are. We live in a little bungalow in Colorado that was built around 1910, which is old for Colorado. And it's a little arts and crafts bungalow. And a few years ago, my husband and I paid off the mortgage and we took some money out and decided we're going to do some remodeling. Well, here was the problem. The bungalow looked great from the outside, but it wasn't so great when we started opening up and finding that there was substantial foundation damage that had been hid by the people who sold us the house behind cosmetic fixes. And literally there were holes in the wall that you could see sunlight through. There were holes in the floor where the floor had rotted through in the kitchen. And when we took the kitchen cabinets out, found out that the joists for the floor were actually lying on water pipes. We had to get a structural engineer in and we had to kind of jack up everything. So we spent most of the time building that little house, rebuilding it so it's up to code. And it was very aggravating and disappointing when friends would come to visit after this massive remodeling and they'd say, but the house looks the same. I said, yes, it looks the same, but it's not going to fall down anymore. So we tell people that change is like a crucible. It's testing every joint and everything that you've ever done. And every mistake you've made as a manager and personnel and programming is going to come to the forefront and change. Now there's another part of this I want to mention before we get started about my attitude toward change. A number of years ago, Hurricane Andrew hit Florida and devastated neighborhood after neighborhood. But they noticed something interesting, and if anyone is interested, you can email me and I'll send you the link to the article. They noticed something interesting where it seemed to be that in every neighborhood, particularly some of the poor neighborhoods, there were houses that were virtually untouched by the hurricane, that they were fine. And people were like, how the heck is it that block after block has, thrown to the ground, and then there are these houses that are just fine? Well, what they discovered was that the houses that were just fine were the houses built by Habitat for Humanity. And the reason that they were standing was because they were built to code. And what I tell people when we talk about change management is that some of the things that I talk about that are necessary for managing change might, to some people, sound tedious. They might sound like excessive project management fixes and so on. But I'll tell you, I want you to build your house to code, because the problems that you're having in change management in your libraries, if you are having problems, in part are because that it wasn't built to code. And when I say to code, it was the relationships with people, the systems that were put in, not the computer systems, but the way people communicated and so on. There were problems, and nobody noticed until you started to change. So the things that I'm mentioning are basically what people do to build a good organization and some of the things that are needed to do to treat people well. It's not just about being the big and the best and getting the 5-star rating and getting the wonderful award from IMLS or the Library of Congress, whatever. It's about building a place that serves your community and institution and treats the people who work there well. So this is a little idea of what we're going to be talking about. We're going to kind of let you know what's in the handout, and then we're going to be discussing, as we did in the morning program, about key ideas, going through the slides, having some exercises, and reviewing some of the resources as well. So if you'd like to pick up your Change in Libraries handout, what I've done is, again, created a bunch of cheat sheets, ways that you can take this information back and share it with other people. And if you would notice, and particularly if you were here this morning for the supervision program, none of my material is copyright protected, so feel free to make copies, share it with people. And we do not charge for phone or email consultations, so you're welcome to contact me as well. There's a couple things that we're doing that I thought you might be interested in. On page 5, we're going to be talking a little bit about new library principles. And one of the things I'm asked to do with library staff around the country is to talk about the fact that all the changes going on in your library are happening everywhere. And I've been watching this now for the years I've been working with libraries, and yes, it is accelerating. So this is kind of my from the field report about some of the things I'm seeing out there in library land. If you take a look at page 8, there's information where it says why adults don't learn faster. And one of the reasons we think that people are resistant to change is they actually don't know how to learn. Now, I taught adult education at the college level for a number of years, and I think that most of us have suffered through mediocre education and we don't even know it. And the problem is that we learn so well when we're teenagers or even in our early college years that we don't realize how much harder it is for some of us in our 40s, 50s, or even older to learn new things. So we're going to talk about that. One of the other things that I find falls apart during times of change is communication. And if you look on page 10, we are going to be talking about something called the 2 sets of contradictory communication rules. And we're going to be working both with our handout and our slides on that particular issue. And we're going to talk a little bit too about verbal and nonverbal communication, partly because people get hypersensitive during times of change, and things that used to work don't work anymore. So I want to make sure that you have plenty of resources going into that. Now, one of the things I'd like to do, we're going to have the break slide up, and we will be taking breaks at the hour and 2 hour mark on the program, so you'll see that. Usually means we have about a 5-minute break coming up. The outcomes that I want for folks are pretty simple. First of all, it's how do you build a stable workplace life and personal life where everything around you is chaotic? And this is something I hear over and over again talking about change, that people say they feel like they're standing on shifting sand. So we're going to talk about how to have that inner stability and ways to provide that also for the people you supervise and work with. The second thing is this workplace communication. And the reason I say more disciplined, it's kind of like learning how to be an ambassador. It's diplomacy. And a lot of times when I'm working with people on conflict issues, I ask them to revert to a slightly more formal, conscious way of communicating, because most of the time we're pretty sloppy. You know, think of it this way. Think about in the last week, even with people you like and respect, about communication mistakes that you might have made with them. My husband and I have been together 38 years, and we still make mistakes with each other. We still misunderstand each other. But you know what? When we're really stressed out, if one of us is sick, if there's a problem going on with our family, something like that, we have to be extra careful. And so there's a little extra care that I want people to be conscious of during times of change. And this is particularly not just for staff, but anyone who's involved in, let's say, the social and emotional life of their workplace. We all get involved with it. And some people say, you know, Pat, are you perfect about gossip? I'm not. But you know, one of the things that I encourage our staff to do, I say, one of the reasons we invented things like professional sports and Hollywood and the British royal family is so that we would have people to gossip about that it won't hurt them. You know, so I rant about some actress who I hate and think the woman's a slut. I hope I can say slut in reach. But I can do that. I can do that. But the important thing is that you got to go find out what the facts are. And I want everyone to be that person in a conversation when someone says something, say, well, let's go find out what the fact is before we spread rumors that aren't true about things. So I hope that this is something that will happen. But again, everyone is in a different place when they come to a program like this. And when you're coming to a change program, wow, there could be 100 different reasons why you're here today. So for both the people who are out there in the ether and our friends here in Burr Ridge, I want to take a couple of minutes because the more I can know about what brought you here today before we do anything else, the better job I can do for you. So let me start with our friends here in Burr Ridge and then see if there's anyone out there who has a special reason for coming. And we're going to check in with you after the hour as well for the next 2 breaks so that we can find out if there's something interesting. So is there anything about the topic that particularly brought anyone here today at our Burr Ridge site? Yeah.
Well, I would just say for myself that first of all, a sort of wanting I guess a practical approach to change, because I think it's just this big word that we talk about. We have to embrace it.
Right.
But it's those are words, and how do you do that? I guess.
Right.
And secondly, I think within libraries and other organizations, it can create this sort of chasm between sometimes, like in a library situation, the frontline staff that are affected by a change because of restructuring, reclassification of their job, and perhaps the people on top that have had to make those decisions, and that can breed negativity and create some problems.
Very good. And both of those things are things we're going to talk about. Very much the point of view makes a big difference, and this is where we're going to talk about the different roles of the different players. And so when I come in and do change management at a workplace, there are different things I say to different people about this, but definitely there is a sense sometimes where with leaders that they have to be focused on the goal and what's happening externally. Unfortunately, staff, and that includes both the professional and technical staff, and I've heard this word a lot, feel abandoned, sort of, in the process of what's going on. But on the other hand, staff sometimes, and this again, professional and the technical staff, can be sometimes not so good at looking at the bigger picture. So again, if a library has been pretty competent up to now with the administrators, leadership, managers, supervisors, and everyone talking and discussing issues for a long period of time, change still might be difficult, but everyone feels like there's open communication and everyone's on the same page. When that communication has been taken for granted, there are way too many surprises. So everyone has to do a better job. There's one phrase that you might hear me use, that information is not give and take. Information is give and seek. And no matter what your position is in a library, you could be a part-time page, you could be a director, you have to spend more time seeking information, perhaps, than you did before. Very good. Anyone else have something that might have brought you here today? Please.
Well, we're doing space needs assessment, so we're involved in a lot of community interaction and looking toward our future, and there may be some very big, concrete physical changes in terms of our space, in addition to the kinds of changes that work their way through libraries all the time.
Right. And?
So I want to be prepared for that. I want to be prepared for that.
Yeah, right. And here's the funny thing about humans, that even when you're making these big physical changes and you're warning everyone and you tell them and tell them and tell them, the day it happens and they act like they've never heard about it before. Also, could you get me some water, please? Even just a glass of water is just fine. Another thing which is pretty funny, in Colorado we have a big AM station called KOA, and it's a clear channel station, meaning that at nighttime it's the only station on its frequency. 50,000 watts, 38 states in Canada. And it's been around for a while, so it's the predominant AM station. Well, a few years ago, they did a survey, and they asked people to comment on what they liked and didn't like about the library. And, the radio station. And a number of people said that they really loved the music. They really loved the music the station played, which is great, except KOA has not been a music station for 20 years. There was a lot of laughing in the administration. So I've had the experience of people who have, for example, moved their library, and 15 years later somebody shows up yelling because the library was moved and no one told him. And well, yeah, we've been here for 20 years, 15 years now at the new location. So unfortunately, our species is not known for rationality about the things. So I tell you this just to prepare you for you do the best, and there's someone's going to be angry at you, and you're thinking, where were you that you didn't notice this was going on, about things, and be good-humored about it. But on the other hand, it's really about this give and seek issue, and making sure that, and this is something, one of these tricks that I think really works, making sure that you have people who are, think of them as change representative embedded in every department, so that, and it's not necessarily a manager or supervisor, it's somebody who's like the change rep who gives the reports and who's there as a neutral person with no power to discipline anyone, but they're there like, okay, I'm the rep from the change thing. This is what we, the janitors, need to know. This is what we, the original monograph catalogers need to know. This is what we, the weekend reference people, need to know. I was working, and I won't mention the library because I don't want to embarrass them. It wasn't from Illinois, but a very large urban library on the East Coast had a big initiative to teach people about emergency services because they had had some problems with physical altercations with some patrons. A very gritty urban library. So administration put together this amazing handbook, printed up several hundred copies and distributed it through their library. And this is a library with 1,200 employees, big library. So they called me in to facilitate the meeting where managers discussed what was in the manual so they could talk to their employees. And it had a bright red cover. So I'm there, and the first question from the floor, and I had about 150 people in the room, is what manual? Well, it's the manual that we've been talking about for the last 6 months with the bright red cover about emergency services. I never saw that manual, never was delivered to my department. And it became like a hissy fight between the administrators and the branch managers of the department. You never sent me one. Yes, we did. And I mean, this kind of thing going on. And then finally someone said, oh yeah, you mean that red thing that showed up a few weeks ago? Yeah, the red thing. Yeah, we're using it to hold up one of the feet on one of the copiers. And people were practically yelling at each other. So we calmed everyone down, and I could not keep a straight face. I mean, they never hired me back probably because I was just laughing through half of it. And I said, it isn't enough to just send the manual out. I know you thought you were doing a good job coming 2 or 3 weeks later, but something as important as this, there should have been something else done right at the beginning of the process and not waiting weeks, because you've blown so much credibility now with people. So even with well-intended people, this can happen for sure. Anything else that might have brought anyone? Please.
I'll be retiring in about a year, and everybody knows, and the board knows, and the staff knows, and it's a planned thing. And so that'll be a big change.
Right.
For me personally and for the staff.
Mm-hmm.
And the board too.
Right.
Because I've been the director there for 15 years. So they're trying to work with me. The board and I are working together on some succession planning.
Mm-hmm. Good.
And so there will be a short period of time when they expect there to be overlap between the new person coming in and myself. And so I've been thinking about, that'll be a huge change for the staff particularly, and trying to think of ways to make that as smooth a transition as possible for everybody involved.
Right. Well, there's 2 parts to this, and this is a good one. We can, since this is certainly a good topic, it's not one we were going to focus on. I'm going to take a couple minutes to talk about this, but this is a great thing. The first thing is, the most important person to ask about what they need to know, obviously, is the new person coming in, but I think that it would be great to survey people who have recently come in as directors and said, what do you wish the person would have done? What do you wish the person would have done? And that, I think, is a really good way to do it. If files are in order, if information has been shared with a whole team of people, so there's a lot of legacy institutional memory among the supervisors and managers there, if everything is done transparently, then to be honest, you don't have much to do. Isn't that good news? Yeah.
Yes and no.
Yeah, that's seriously.
That's a lot of work.
What? No, but if it's already been done, I mean, if everyone, I'm not putting this on you, if everyone has done their good project management, supervision, leadership job during the time you've been there, and stuff has been documented, and the files have been done and everything's great, then that's great. And you've done that, and you've done what you should be done. But you know what the other side of it is? I'm one of those people who tells directors, get out of town, because it's an attachment issue that whoever comes in is going to have to build their own political network, their own support network among people. They have to come in with fresh eyes. They have to be able to build their own relationships with the power structure of your town and everything. And actually, they're a different person from you. And I've seen very conscientious directors say, well, I'll be around to answer questions, and then they sit by the phone and nobody calls. Because the new person coming in says, hey, unless it's an operation, things like, where's the key to the backup battery, right? If there's a like a tornado or something about that. The other stuff is they're going to have to figure out, and it is much better that they not hear it from you, actually, that they, in my opinion, that they hear it from the board and from other folks and build that relationship. And then if they want to call you, they can, but people are amazed how rarely that new person calls the old director about stuff. So I want to lift a lot of guilt and stuff off your shoulders. It's like, get out of town, have a good time. You're going to Tahiti, I understand, right? That's where you're going to have your, to think. Isn't that a good news, though? It's funny. A friend of mine who actually recently retired told me about his first month on the job in his new directorship. And the library director before had left this big mess, and he was bragging to the other directors about all the big changes he was going to make. And one of the wise old owls in the group smiled at him and said, and how long do you think, when your new person comes in after you, they're going to wait before they rip and tear apart everything you've done and build something new? And he said, well, maybe 2 weeks about stuff. They're going to get their hands in. One lady who's a wonderful award-winning director from the South called me up because she had bullied her board into letting her be on the transition team. And she said she was really upset with the board because she didn't like how they were choosing the new director and everything. And I said, I don't know how to tell you this, but it's none of your business and it's not your job. I said, so do the best job you can for the last month you're there, have a great time, make sure the board has all the information they need, and let them go. Let them go about stuff. So, but some of the stuff we come up with might apply that a little bit. So, Joe, does anyone from the ether have something for us?
Well, we had two people that are dealing with new building, like going to referendum, so the change that will come there. We have one individual who is in a small nonprofit library, dealing with new board, is the only staff member there, and is new to this 34-year-old organization as of 2014. So both change for him or her, and then change within the organization. Yeah.
So the first thing is that there's some people who are dealing with a referendum?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. And again, this isn't part of the program we're doing today, but I have a sheet that I'm willing to send people. You'll have to email me, and you have my contact information in your handout and your slides about how to win elections. And again, yes, I was born and raised in Chicago. My dad worked for the first mayor daily, and I know about Chicago politics and Illinois politics. And so this is something, and it's about very specifically how to win elections ethically, with integrity. I know that's a shock to some of you, but yes, it can be done. So that's something I might mention. And you said referendum, and then what else? Is a change.
So another individual just says working on new library.
Okay. Very good. And building projects. I would say if you haven't worked on a building project before, the thing that stuns people is no one's ever prepared for how much time it takes on a daily basis to do a building project. It pretty much sucks up their brain. And my suggestion is that unless the library is large enough and rich enough that the assistant director is able to step in fully in the leader's shoes, you really have to be modest and lower your expectations of what you can accomplish in terms of things like programming and other stuff during the period the building's going up, because you can't believe how much time it takes. And some days I've had directors tell me that even with an associate and an architect council and the board on board, it took me basically 10 hours a day for weeks just to deal with building stuff. And I couldn't get anything else done. So you need to hand off day-to-day decision making to someone else, even if you're a small library. Some people even do it with a board member, but someone's got to make decisions. They can't wait for you, and you have to, if you're that right person, keep the project on track. So that's something to think about. And there was one other one?
The other one was an individual working for a small nonprofit library who has a new library board. This person is the only staff member,
Right.
one person show, and they're new to this 34-year-old organization as of this past year, 2014.
This is where the most important thing is definitely communication. If you have a new board, and I'm not clear, and they can choose to tell you this or not, with a nonprofit board, if they're talking about a public library that's organized as an association or a nonprofit that has a contract with local government to do a public library, or if they're a nonprofit organization per se, and it's in effect a special library within the nonprofit. But in either case, with a new board and a new director or staff person, whatever you can do to improve communication, take advantage of all the board training and everything that your state library, your system, and other library organizations in the state offer. That will be a big help during this period as well. So let's kind of look at those slides that we have, excuse me, and I'm going to get a cough drop in a minute because I can hear my voice going, but I will get through the day. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Pat Wagner. I live in Denver, Colorado, and I've been a trainer and consultant for libraries of all types since 1978, and I've been coming in to visit Illinois libraries, I think, for at least 20 years, and in the olden days worked for all of the systems across the state from one end to the other. I am a speaker at state and national conferences. I've spoken at your state association meeting and all the big ones that are held, not just in Chicago, but other parts of the country. And yes, you can tell by my accent, I am a Chicagoan, born and raised on the South Side, but yes, still a Cubs fan after all these years about things. And the images that we're using today are from the Pixabay site, which is a free open source site for photos and art that you can use in any way. And the way they do it is that everyone who puts their art up or their photographs agrees that you don't even have to do an attribution, which can save a lot of time and energy. So they don't even ask you to do something like this, but all the images we use are from Pixabay, and we're very grateful for their service. So what are the high points of the day? First of all, thinking about what it means when you realize that we are at a point now where change is continuous. So the things that we're talking about today, there's not going to be really a hiatus, even after you build your building or win your money or have a transition to a new director or something changes. This is how the world is. We're going to talk a little bit about that. The second thing is, first and foremost, you have to take care of your own morale, take care of your own life, how you feel about things, particularly if you're in a leadership role, because your attitude toward change is going to color how everybody else sees change as well. So the ability for you to do stability and make things better for yourself are going to make a big difference for the people around you. The importance that you come to work with your own goals and priorities. Now, it's interesting. I believe in the idea of a personal strategic plan. When I was growing up, I grew up in an immigrant neighborhood on the South Side, and I tell people that I knew when I was 7 years old what the strategic plan was for our family, because my mom took me to the old Goldblatt's department store in Chicago, which I hated. And she held up 2 dresses. I was going into the 2nd grade, and she held up 2 dresses, and she said, "Okay, sweetheart, which of the 2 dresses would you like for school?" And I said, "Why can't I have both dresses, Mom?" And she said, "Because you're going to college." "Why don't we have desserts, Mom? Like we didn't have desserts growing up like normal families." She said, "Because you're going to college." "Why don't we have a 2nd car?" "Because you and your sister are going to college." And so we knew what the destination was. And in our family, my generation was all girls. So all my cousins were girls. We were required by family culture that we all had to bring our report cards to family parties. And all my big, good-looking Romanian Jewish uncles and cousins would pass all of my cousins and my sisters and report cards around. And these were big, good-looking men who worked mostly in the big printing companies and factories in Chicago, all blue-collar, most of whom had been born in Romania, most of whom did not have high school educations. My dad actually was the first person in the family to graduate from high school. And they would pass them around. They'd say, "See, Wagner girls are smarter than boys." So you know what was cool? None of us dumbed down. You know that whole thing of girls dumbing down when they hit junior high and senior high? You know, so I'm like the black sheep of the family. My cousin Phyllis got her PhD in nuclear physics when she was 21, and my cousin Laura runs the finances for the state of Oregon. I'm the failure of the family in effect. But it took everybody together knowing what were the goals, and those goals set the priorities. My sister and I were kind of geek girls, like we liked microscopes, not dolls. But we could get any book we wanted. If we wanted a book, if we wanted a special class, if we wanted something, we could ask our parents. But we knew that this was not a family where you could ask for fancy stuff. My parents didn't deprive us in any way, but we knew we were all in it together. So we had goals and we had priorities. You know, very classic American success story for our family. So the same thing is true, is that I believe that goals and priorities give you a framework. It's like creating that framework to resist the hurricanes and really working with your family and your friends and the people who count on to make sure you're on the same page. What breaks my heart sometimes when I'm working with someone in a library who's going through a bad time according to change, I ask about their family and they may tell me, and I'm not a counselor or anything, that their spouse or partner or their kids are not on board on the changes that are going on. And the heartbreaking thing when I hear someone saying, because of agreements we have in my family, I have to stick in this job that I hate that's killing me. And it's like, no, this is America. No. And part of it is I suggest the person to find a marriage counselor of some kind. And I have had people over the years come up to me and say, "You don't recognize me, but I was complaining about change and you said get a counselor and work with your family. And as a result, it took me 2 years and you told me it was going to take 2 years and it did. I found a terrific job. My partner or spouse is happy. My kids are happy. There were hardships, but now I'm in a wonderful job that I love and I'm out of that situation. And I didn't think that I was able to make those personal changes, but you were right. I could find the support to find out what I wanted." So having those professional goals, it's like gives you the stability and anchor you need regardless of what's going on around you. Building a team of positive, healthy coworkers, we'll talk about this, but one thing I know for sure, are we reinforcing positive behavior with the people we work with? Or are we sitting around saying, "Ain't it awful?" I remember a very nice lady, and this would have been 25 years ago at a Special Library Association conference. And everyone in the room was a special librarian, and this particular woman stood up, and I found out later she was the head librarian for a large engineering firm in New York City, and she was crying. And she stood up and she said, "Can't it be 1953 again?" I said, "No, it can't be 1953 again." and she was heartsick. Now, I'm not the person who says you shouldn't complain, because I think that we need feedback to improve what's going on. But I have to tell everyone it's not going to be 1953 again for libraries in America. I don't know how to do that, and I don't think anyone else does either. And then finally, what does it mean to focus on productivity and disengage from drama? The dangerous thing that we have to understand is that, and this is a theory like most theories of human behavior, but it's one that is dear to my heart. Human beings are psychopharmaceutically addicted to stress. Let me say that word again. Psychopharmaceutically. And what does that mean? Is that we become addicted to our stress chemicals produced in the body. And we get addicted to being angry and snippy and snarky and complaining about things all the time. Because when we do, our body produces chemicals. It produces the equivalent of methamphetamines. It produces the endorphins, which are the equivalent of heroin. It produces drugs that make us crazy and sick. It produces cortisol, which is the equivalent of steroids. So you don't realize it, but when you're sitting around at lunch on Friday with your friends complaining about all the changes, and isn't this awful? Oh, and remember again, what was it that Fred did last week? Oh my goodness, let's talk about Fred and how awful he is, and the director's this, and our staff are that. Everybody does it at all levels. We don't realize we're telling our body is to produce this triple addictive chemical package of amphetamine, steroid, and heroin that affects us just like street jugs. I mean, it's like we're going out and getting injected. And what happens is those drugs give us meaning and purpose in life. So we become reinforced to sit around and talk about how awful things are because it gives us chemical meaning and purpose to our lives. I'm not making this stuff up, by the way. You can talk to your doctor about it or a nurse. And I check it with medical professionals and they just, yep, that's what happens. So we're going to talk about how maybe to disengage from that drama. Now, if, again, you don't like what's going on in your library, there's a lot of valid ways that you can constructively complain about things and so on. But I have to say that for a lot of the things I'm hearing people be concerned about with American libraries, that train has sort of left the building. So I don't believe that some of the things people don't like that's going on are going to be reversed anytime soon. So yes, for a lot of people, this isn't what they signed up for. For a lot of people, they think it's going to fail, and it probably will. But we're in this giant transition period. So let's see how we can make things better for ourselves and for other people as well. So let's take a look at some of the things that we have. Every program I do, it's sort of like a key idea. And the key idea for the program today is about how to bring stability to a workplace that is changing. And bringing stability means we're still going through these changes, but how can you make it better for yourself and for the other people around you? How can you be more effective and more productive, even though sometimes it feels like the sky is falling in? Now, I had talked before about the players, and this was alluded to. Everybody who works in the library has a point of view. If you're standing over here looking this way at a library, you see a different piece of what's going on from if you're standing over here. And it's not that some people are indifferent as much as they literally see something different. They see something different. And in classical organizational theory, people who are in leadership positions have most of their attention focused out and to the future. And they're thinking 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years in advance. People who are at the management supervisory level are kind of like the stabilizers, the gyroscopes. They're trying to maintain things, keep them simple. They're trying to look at all the different people, create a framework. And then you have the technical people and the professional folks, and they're focused right now on the here and now, getting the job done. And it could be everything again from sweeping the floor to fairly high-level reference and cataloging. Has nothing to do with how old someone is, how educated or experienced. So the professional and technical folks, their attention is like right in front of their noses, getting this done. The managers and supervisors are trying to coordinate what's going on with this and that, and then the leaders are looking here. It's kind of like that old thing about the wise men and the elephant, and each feeling a different part of the elephant and thinking that the elephant was a different creature depending on what they were doing. So as we go through the program today, I'm going to be saying, and from a leader point of view, or from a supervisor point of view, or from a staff point of view, this is how things might look. And the more we can empathize with the job that other people have, the more likely we are to be effective communicators with them and understand what's going on. So this is what I mean by the players. And notice also, there's a couple of other people. There's the library customers themselves. During times of change, it is very natural for people to find their best friends in the library customer community and go up to them and say, I think the old way of doing things is wonderful. Don't you think it's wonderful, Maud? Because you're my best friend and we've known each other forever. And of course, that particular customer agrees. And then you go running back to your director and said, well, I talked to the customers and they think the changes are awful. Well, it's not quite that simple. Everyone has a different view, about how effective the change is or isn't. I know a library in Colorado, and I won't mention which one it was, but at the time it was rated as the worst performing library in the state of Colorado. This was a few years ago. We are proud of the fact that in Colorado, our active usage of library cards in Colorado is somewhere around 85%. So if you're a Colorado library, it is not uncommon for you to have 100% usage based on the demographics of your community, and we're proud of that as a state. We're very literate, and there's active, even especially in our smaller rural libraries, very active support for libraries. So I was at the meeting brought in to talk about change with the current staff of this library. I had 4 branches, and the director was talking about the poor performance in the past, but she said, we've got a lot of great things we're going to do in the future. And one of the branch managers said, all my friends love the library. And she said, only 12% of your friends come to the library. And you lost the last 4 referendums in a row. And the only reason you didn't lose the 5th one is people said that they didn't want to be embarrassed by being the largest library closure in the history of the United States. And that's why it barely snuck by. She says, you only talk to your friends who come to the library. You're not talking to the other 88% of the county who have been here for years about things. And from the perspective of that employee, who I'm not saying was a bad employee, was a branch manager, everything was fine. Because their buddies came in and said, oh, I love the library. Oh, dingy, dark, awful buildings, I'll tell you. I wouldn't like them even if it was my best friend running it. So we have to really think about the fact, what do the library customers think? And there'll be a lot of different views. And then the greater community institutional stakeholders, elected and appointed officials and the media, other institutions, schools, universities, and so on. So there's a lot of people who are looking over our shoulders when it comes to change. Now, what I'd like to do now is to give you something that's called the Change Mastery Quiz. We're going to go through, I think it is about 8 different big ideas having to do with change. And what I'd like to do is have you look through these ideas. And if you would like a print copy of these ideas, if you look on page 2 of your print handout, you'll have the same information. So you can follow along on your slide handout for slide 10 or 11, or you can do it off of your print handout where it says is change difficult. And these are concepts, qualities that we have noticed occur in people who are able to manage change very well. So I'm going to go through these, and I'd like you to give yourself a score from 1 to 10 about how well you think you do these, and then we'll see if we can get a little feedback both from the Burr Ridge group and from our colleagues in the ether about some of the ideas having to do with this. So let me go through them, and again, give yourself a score of 1 to 10, 1 being never, 10 being always. So the first one is that people who are willing to deal with change well, good, willing to look at new information and modify their beliefs based on current facts, not just sticking to what happened yesterday. that they're willing to be scientists. It would be kind of like, I know my doctor's going to give me a bad time about my blood pressure when I go see them in a week or so. And I might say to my doctor, because I don't want to go on heavier blood pressure medication, but my blood pressure was really good a month ago. Is that going to buy it with my doctor? Because they're caring about what happens today. What's the data from today? And the data is changing about a lot of things, what people prefer in libraries, literacy rates. I mean, there's a whole bunch of information changing. So just because what you know was working beautifully in 2008 doesn't mean that it's working in 2015. So if you are willing to have a scientific frame of mind, that you're willing to look at new information, that means you're probably going to be good. Now, what I don't say here is that people who refuse to look at new information are basically people we call true believers. And it's not meant in a theological sense. A true believer is someone who's made up their mind about something and will not accept a new fact. And if you hear someone say, I don't care what facts you give me, I know what's right and wrong, I know what's true about stuff, that's a true believer. I'm a true believer when it comes to the Chicago Cubs. Nothing you will tell me will ever convince me they might not someday win the World Series, really. But in other things in my life, I hope that if you are able to supply me data, I'll take that data seriously. So give yourself a score of 1 to 10. How well do you think you do this? The second thing is that your own self-esteem does not depend on your status in the workplace. Status in the workplace could be defined on things as silly, I shouldn't say it that way, as fundamental as how big is your desk? How big is your office? How big is your name tag? Where do you park? What is your title? You know, people get really freaked out about this. And this seems to be an anthropological concept. There's a theory in anthropology, and it is just a theory, but most anthropologists that I've talked with subscribe to it, that if you go back even a few hundred years, most human beings lived in little villages of 250 or 150 people to 500. I know that that's where my family came from in the 19th century, from Russia and Poland and Romania, from small villages. Well, what's true all over the world of indigenous people, if you're in a little village and you really, really tick off the leadership of the village, what do you think happens to you? What happens to you? Pardon? You get kicked out. If you are in that little village and you tick off the leadership, you get kicked out, which basically is a death sentence, right? You're thrown out to starve to death alone in the dark. So the theory of some anthropologists is that we are hardwired to fear the loss of status, which is why a lot of people get so crazy about what we might think are little things, because it feels like they're going to die. I'm going to lose my title, I'm going to die. I'm going to lose my corner office, I'm going to die. I've been paid unconscionable amounts of money to go into corporations where two people were fighting over whose desk was closer to the window. I kid you not. So it's kind of funny when we watch it, but it's very human. But there's a lot of folks who don't care about status. They don't care about the titles. They don't care about this stuff. They just want to do their job, and they're cheerful about it, and so on. People who are able to navigate through life and not be concerned all the time about their status in the workplace seem to do better during times of change. So give yourself a score again from 1 to 10. Number 3, workplace relationships don't depend on status. So how people are treated by you. You know, are you polite to the waiter? Are you polite to the janitor? Do you make friends with the support staff? Outside the military, where people are not allowed to commingle because it might mean someone's life, I'm fascinated when I go into places and the people at the top don't know anybody else. And on the other hand, I love going to places where the people at the top have friendly relationships with people. Now, let's take that issue of supervision. Yes, we have to consider the fact that when we're supervisors, we may have to fire people we like, hire and fire people we like, but that doesn't mean that we can't get to know people and be polite and friendly with people who work with us and for us. My dad was a doctor, and I used to love to walk through the halls of his hospital with him, and it always took 10 times longer than we planned because every janitor came up to say hello, every nurse came up to say hello. And what was interesting is that on a Saturday, when I was in college, I would come back to Wisconsin, up to Kenosha where we had moved, to see my dad at his hospital, and we would walk through the halls and he'd tell me things that were going on. And people would come up to him casually dressed. You could not tell from my dad's treatment of the person if the person in blue jeans and a t-shirt was a janitor or a doctor who had stopped by after cleaning out their garage and kitchen to pick up something at the hospital. Because he was frank, to quote Dorothy Sayers, he was frank, friendly, and fair with everyone who came in. So how good are your workplace relationships? I have heard some librarians say to me, and this was an exact quote, I am not used to egalitarian workplaces where I expect to treat people beneath me as social equals. That sentence came out of the mouth of a Chicago librarian a few years ago. My response to her was, get over it. Another place I couldn't go back to. Okay, so number 3, workplace relationships. Number 4, this should be self-evident, ladies and gentlemen, but how much are you a lifelong learner? How much are you saying, ooh, I can learn something new, way cool? That was something I loved about my mother. She loved computers. She loved learning about computers. My father-in-law was a rancher, and we took a bunch of computer equipment down to the ranch when he was in his 70s. He did not have a college degree, had never seen or touched a computer before. And we hooked everything up in the ranch house and got it all running. And he was pecking away and going at it. And I said, what are these really stupid things? I said to him, wow, Dad, usually men your age are afraid of computers. And he looked at me and he grinned and he took his hand, and he talked just like Gary Cooper. He took his hands off the keyboard and he said, honey, can this little machine hurt me? And I said, no. And then he smiled and he says, well, put me on a Brandon pen with a 1,000-pound calf trying to break my leg, I'll be worried. But if this little thing can't hurt me, I'm fine. He's pecking away, going at the computer, having a good time. He loved learning things. He probably read 5 or 6 books a week, cover to cover. And I mean like thick history books and economic books and things like that. My husband's in his 70s, and I think he reads 8 books a week. And he goes to classes. He's always online, taking classes, learning new things about stuff. And we all learn. Now, I know not everyone has the budget for this, but I pay my employees to read. And so everybody who works for me, like the guy who's working for me right now, gets paid for an hour a day to read. And he right now is working on foundation books in our business, and he also is working on a book on graphic design and a book on a new coding thing he wants to do, but also something on the future of libraries, since most of our clients are libraries as well. Lifelong learners tend to, I don't want to say sail through change, they do pretty good. They do pretty good. So give yourself points for lifelong learning. Okay. What is your assumption about the world? Do you think that change means scarcity, or rationally or irrationally, do you believe that change is going to create new opportunities and new resources? Some things are going to be taken away, some things are going to be added. I love the fact that I can come out here and spend time in Wisconsin and Illinois with family and friends and run my Colorado business from a little motel in Racine. That I have my laptop and I can talk to clients, I can prepare documents, I can file reports, I can do banking business, I can pay bills, I can make bank transfers. I can do a whole bunch of things that I couldn't do 20 years ago. For the most part, I like the 21st century. It's been good to me. So what do you think change is going to be? Is it going to be all bad or all good? Maintain civility, goodwill, and manners. Some people use change as an excuse to be bullies, to be mean-spirited. Like they're not treating me well, so I get to be treating other people not well. Some people spend the whole change process pouting. That's fun. Cold silences, slam doors. Some people use sarcasm as a weapon. I remind people that the word sarcasm has the same language root as the word sarcoma. Sarcasm means flesh eating. We've known for a couple of thousand years that sarcasm wounds. And so if you use the kind of sarcasm in discussing change agent, things that wound other people, if you say something and you're afraid someone's going to be standing behind you and you've hurt people's feelings, then you're using sarcasm as a weapon. So how good are you at maintaining civility, goodwill, and manners? Negotiation skills. Negotiation skills is asking for what you want in a way to make it easy for the other person to say yes. I was working with a group of libraries in New York City, and I had someone stand up at this group meeting and tell me about what their strategy was for dealing with people in power, which was really to publicly humiliate them in meetings. And I said, that's your idea of strategy? You know, do you watch too much TV or something like that? They said, well, people need to know what I feel. And I said, oh, I thought that your goal was to get what you wanted. So now you're telling me your goal is different. You want to sound off at public meetings. That's different from getting what you want. And I told them the story of my friend Chris. And my friend Chris, I won't go into all the details, but my friend Chris is just a guy. He's not important or anything. But he saw that there was a bill in Congress going through that he thought was very important. And a bunch of his friends were going to picket and do a whole bunch of stuff about it. That's not what Chris did. Chris literally borrowed a suit from his brother, flew to DC, and made appointments with congressmen. And this was a few years ago when it was easier, but he actually made appointments with congressmen, got through to see most of them, and he had a nice little speech about why he thought this particular congressional bill should not pass. And he had work he had done and research and everything. He was extremely polite to everyone. Well, lo and behold, the bill didn't pass. How much of it was Chris' effort, we'll never know. But for Chris, he knew how to ask for what he wanted. And what's important is that Chris is the kind of guy who's been politically active his whole life, who can get what he wants from other people, and the next day they're still smiling at each other. He's still friends with them. He doesn't create enemies. He doesn't go to war with people. And I have to say, I've noticed an unpleasant trend in libraries in the last few years, justifying wars against people in their institutions and communities based on the idea, well, you started it. You said you hated libraries, so I get to hate you. You said you hate me, so I get to hate you. And let's not do that. It's not productive. And then finally, remember their personal mission. Where are they going and why? They have that compass, that anchor inside of them that gives them direction and meaning. So what we're going to do is give yourself a score from 1 to 10. We're going to take our first break now for 5 minutes, and when we come back, we're going to take a look at what people wrote down and then move through the rest of the slides. Okay? Okay. Answer, basically to give yourself a score of 1 to 10. So I guess my question is, first of all, did anyone have any questions about these 8 ideas that we had listed on the 2 slides that are also on page 2 of your handout? Did anyone have any questions or comments about these? Did they make sense pretty much? There we go. The second part is, I think that a score of 6 or higher is a pretty good score. So I can use my magic X-ray vision and see all the people who are out there. And if you gave yourself a score of 6 or higher on something, why don't you use the chat box to email Joe, and in a minute or two, he'll let us know what it is that you gave yourself a score of 6 or higher. How about you folks in the room? Was there anything on the list that you gave yourself a score of 6 or higher on? Yeah? Very good. What was something?
Well, I think the very first one,
Mm-hmm.
look at new information and modified beliefs based on current facts. I feel like I'm pretty strong.
Good. That's a hard one, too. That's a hard one, too. Very good. Anyone else have one? You say, yeah, I gave myself a score of 6 or higher.
I did on the workplace relationships don't depend on status.
Mm-hmm.
We're all there. We're all doing our job.
Right. Excellent. Anyone else? Did you, sir, have one 6 or higher?
Oh, yeah, the first 4 items.
Very good. Excellent.
I don't care about status.
Excellent. 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 That's going to be killer. Did you have one 6 or higher?
We assume that change creates new opportunities and new resources.
Excellent,
And I
excellent.
think once you've experienced that and found that to be true, then that greatly increases your ability to work with change as going forward.
Yes.
And I also think that that it is a learnable skill,
Mhm.
very learnable. And then if you kind of force yourself to do it,
Mm-hmm.
I was part of change when two organizations merged together. There used to be a
Wow.
medical librarian, and two hospitals merged together. And so they came up with a new name for the new merged entity. And a lot of people, years later, they still were not using, they were
Oh.
each using, wherever building they were in originally, they were still using that name.
Of course.
And I, from the very first day that we knew that this is the name, I just made a point of using that name
Mm-hmm.
until it became second nature.
Right.
And I think that it was kind of a small thing, but it really helped a lot.
Excellent.
And I could tell from the other people around.
Mm-hmm.
And the amount of time it took them to adopt that new name was a pretty good indication of whether they were an early adopter or
That's interesting.
someone who's very resistant.
That's very interesting. Now, how about any folks from the ether? Anyone email about?
You know, the ones that we got were civility, workplace relationships, and status.
Excellent, excellent. So now let's look at the other part. Is there anything on this list you think, you know, I got to work on this a little. I want to raise my score. Did anyone have anything? Again, yes.
Well, I'll just say for me that first one, you know, and I don't want to say laziness, but it's always easiest to keep your current belief. Sometimes it's taken work to get to where you are and have that belief, and then all of a sudden there's new information, so you got to change those. So it's always easiest to just stick with those beliefs and not force yourself to adapt in the face of new information.
You know, what is true? I had an experience working with a library. This was an academic library in Texas. And this is how change stuff can happen even with the littlest issues that you're working on. So I'm working with the executive staff of a large academic library, had about 600 employees, and great people in the executive staff. And I was helping to facilitate a meeting where they had to make a really big decision on how to change how collection development was financed. You know, and in universities, there's all these complex agreements that they might have department to department. So there's always a question, does the department share part of their budget to build the collection for stuff that's important to that academic department, or do they have designs on part of the library's budget, and goes back and forth. So it can be a pretty involved issue. So people had come up with something that I guess was kind of innovative, but then everyone frowned and said, oh, it's never going to work. And I said, why not? And they said, well, the head of the faculty senate hates this idea. Well, you guys just came up with it. What do you mean he hated it? No, Fred had a conversation with him in the hallway 3 years ago. And he said he would never support this kind of thing in a million years. So everyone was like, oh, we can't do it. I said, wait a minute, that was 3 years ago. Things change. I said, does anyone in the room know this guy well enough that they could call him up? And one of the librarians said, sure, he's the head of the mathematics department. I can call him up. I said, during break, call him up and see what he says. Are you willing to do that? She said, sure. So she went on break and came back. He said, he doesn't even remember the conversation from 3 years ago. He said, maybe I was drunk, I don't know, but he's all for it. He's fine. He says, I'll sign off for it. I'll send you an email to that effect. Sounds like a great idea. And I was thinking, this group of experienced credential academics were going to self-censor a great idea based on a conversation one of them thinks they had with somebody 3 years ago. You know, so let's do science, guys. Let's find out if this stuff is true or not. Did anyone else here have something on the list you want to improve a little bit? Raise your score a little bit from this list of 8 ideas.
I have one. From the part about what happened yesterday affecting how you think about proposed change or things like that. And that is that I have noticed lately that I have been in libraries for so long and have been a director for so long and worked with so many boards and for a long period of time that there are a lot of things that cycle around again and again. And I know how it turned out the first 3 or 4 times that it
Right.
cycled around, and somebody wants to try it again, or to do it again, or to do something like it again. And I'm thinking, I know how this is going to turn out, and I'm going to do all this work and spin my wheels, and it's going to turn out the same way that it always turned out before.
Right.
And so, but they don't know that.
Right.
Are they, for new people who've never experienced
So which is the one from the list? Which
I
one?
think the thing about letting things that happened yesterday affect,
Oh, I see what you mean. Right, right.
yeah, instead of being open to an idea that someone had that would be a change, just dismissing it because, well, we've tried that before and it didn't
Right.
work.
This is rude, but I sometimes tell people, well, maybe this new group will be smarter than you. Maybe they'll figure out how to do it in a way that you didn't. And technology has changed. Things that we tried, maybe they have a different skill set. Maybe the technology is going to work. I've noticed that with myself. There's certain things in technology I'm resistant to, but I've had computer equipment on my desk since 1976. So sometimes I can be very difficult about that, but I've learned to say, now there's electricity. So I kind of make fun of myself and I say, remember before there was electricity, this is how we did things. And that's hard. And even if you're right, we have to keep testing. We have to keep testing. I had a personal experience, a medical experience a few years ago where I had a mystery disease. And after 8 wrong diagnoses and multiple doctors and multiple this and that, the doctor who came up with something that fixed me came up with something that was a formula invented by the British Army during World War I. Something that some of you may know if you have that background called Dakin's solution, which is baking soda and bleach in water. And that was the thing that cured me after everything else did nothing, right? And I told my doctor, he said, yes, a lot of these old remedies are coming back and more doctors are talking about these old remedies that work just fine. Which worked just fine. So I'm kind of like, let's go back and see if there's something good we happen. So here's the good news, is that as complicated, yes, as, here we go. Let me start with the change symptoms. So what we find is that people during times of change start feeling stress. And these are some of the warning signals. First of all, people will tell me, I can't find my way around. There's no map. They want a map of some kind. And what I tell people, and this particularly goes to those who are the players in management and leadership, even if the map is only good for 2 weeks, give people the map. Even if it's only good for 1 week, give people the map. Because one thing I hear over and over again is people saying, I felt discombobulated, disoriented, because everyone keeps telling me change is happening too rapidly. I can't make the time to tell you what's going on. You're just going to have to trust me. That doesn't work for a lot of people. But what I found does work if you say, this is what we know today, and this is what I'm pretty sure about is going to happen in the next week. People can go home satisfied with that. And it takes a little more overhead. We call it management overhead to say, maybe we can only tell you week by week. But if you look at how military run, often they can only give people a map that's good for a few days or even a few hours. But that helps orient people for that period of time. And people have told me, we can trust you to tell us what you know at the time. We went through a big change in spring, a way big change, and I was giving the people who worked for me daily little debriefings and saying, this is where we are right now and stuff. And I said to people, now it's going to change tomorrow, but at least you know what's going on today. So they could make decisions based on what we knew at the time. Not organized, no priorities. And this is where it's really important for managers to help people say, during times of change, what are the priorities? So again, our little business, smaller than most of you, but even when we had 5, 6 employees, plus my husband and myself, we had a quickie staff meeting every single morning and basically said, what are the priorities for the day? Because things were changing so rapidly. I just at break got a report back from my employee right now, Toby, who said, this is what I accomplished today. And these are my priorities for today. And he said, does this correlate with what we're supposed to be doing? He said, yeah, go for it. So it took him 30 seconds to check in. So we have to be willing to, at the same time, give people a map. Part of that is priorities. What's more important than something else? And the idea is that people can make choices that align with your choices. One of the worst things I think we can tell someone is use your judgment, because that doesn't help align what they're doing with the strategic plan and the needs of the larger group. I don't tell Toby how to do his work, and unless we have deadlines, I don't tell him what order he should do his work, how he should plan his day, anything like that. But I do say to him, here's a couple of priorities we have right now based on deadlines. And he says, okay, I'll make sure I knock these out first before I do anything else. Unexpected change is also known as whack-a-mole. You do something, something else pops up. You do something, something else pops up. That's when you need the priorities, and that's when you need the map, so that we don't get sideswiped by things. And this means that you have a philosophy of what are the bigger issues that happen. So I live in Colorado dealing with family issues in Wisconsin. We had a big talk with everyone who works with us about those priorities, that kind of workplace. So everybody knows, including my accountant and my lawyer and the Internal Revenue Service, anyone else we have to deal with, that phone calls from my mother's nursing home take number one priority. Phone calls from the lawyer who's handling my mother's affairs is number two. And that's number one and number two. So what's number one and number two? If you went back and talked to the people who work with you and for you, would they know what number one, number two is? So they would have an idea of what the priorities are during the days of change. And it's not like the world goes on hell. We still have operations to do. We still have bills to pay. We still have bank deposits to make. We have customers to wait on. Books have to be shelved. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that no matter what the change is going on, we still have the day-to-day. The snow still falls. We still have to shovel, right? We still have to get those things done. So what the priorities are really important for aligning people. And I'm a big fan of the stand in front of a flip chart and write them down. And so that's one of the things I did before I left on this 2-week trip to the Midwest, that Toby and my husband and I sat down and we organized what were Toby's priorities, what were household priorities, what were my husband's priorities. And because we've, you know, like we love being adorable, our cats, Joe and Lefty, have their little priorities, you know, catching mice or whatever we assign for them. They have my priorities, what are needed. Toby will give me a list of things that I'm the bottleneck for, that he's waiting on, that I haven't given him something. He gives me a list of priorities as well, as his boss. What does he need to get done that he's not getting done because I'm not giving him what he wants in a timely fashion? So he's learning how to manage me as a boss to make sure that I remember what his needs are is all. Contradictions, who do I believe? What happens during times of change, it's very, very common that people will grab the person nearest them and say, what should I do? And what happens out of this is that people who actually don't have the legal right to make a decision or give you permission are giving you permission to do things you shouldn't be doing. Really simple things are like purchases for something, or how do I deal with a vendor, or how do I deal with a situation where we have to make a decision about things. So we have to be very clear about who gets to govern. And governance means who makes what decisions. What decisions do people have the right to make? So I leave Toby and my husband alone for 24 hours, and I notice what pops up on my computer. I have one of those things that tells me when any purchase is made on any of our credit cards. $200 purchase for software. And I'm like, what? And sure enough, my husband and Toby had a conversation, and they're coders, and so they're talking about programming, and they got all excited about this program, and they bought the software. And we had already decided not to buy that software. My husband forgot and bought it. And it's annoying because it's an expense that we didn't need, and on and on about things. But one of the things we reviewed is who gets to make what decisions. And this governance model is so important. And some kinds, on the other hand, we have to say, but you know what? If there are important decisions, what if that person isn't there? And I'm going to write this word nice and big over here, because this is some of the ways that we allow things to keep moving, is What's the default? What decisions can Toby make when my husband and I aren't there? And those decisions range from things like Toby's family raised cats when he was a kid. We have 2 cats. We live a block from the vet. We have a signed document with the vet that says we'll pay for anything that happens. And we told Toby, we will trust your judgment in terms of the cats are sick or not. And if something happens and you think the cats should be taken to the vet, you take them to the vet and we'll back up your decision. So we have conversations with it about people like this. So people are aligned to these decisions. And finally, what we have to understand is that people are going to feel like emergencies are the norm. There's all these surprises, and those coursing chemicals will make people react without thinking. So one of the things we talk a lot about in our business is the pause button. That one thing that we really need during times of change is to take a breath and say, what's the risk factor here? Right? And as I said with the supervision class this morning, we're not running nuclear power plants and we're not running children's hospital. And pause is important. We're going to go on to the next slide in a minute, but one thing I noticed in my own life, a few years ago, my husband did a husband thing and got very ill. And we're in an emergency room in Los Angeles in the middle of the night. And I was fascinated watching the head of the emergency room, how calm she was during this emergency that we're having. And growing up in a medical family, I was okay at the time, but she was really calm. Oh, hi, are you his wife? Yeah, I'm his wife, and we talked and everything. And she was keeping an eagle eye on everything going on, but no hysteria, no hysterics. Like, okay, we can see this through. Let's take it one at a time. And having that inner sense of calm is really, really so important when you're trying to do changes of different kind. And that's one of the most important gifts that you can bring to your workplace during times of change, even if you're not a supervisor or a manager or a director. If you're an employee, having that inner sense of things basically are going to be okay. We're middle-class Americans. This is Illinois. You know, we're not in the middle of the Sahara Desert, and we have water and food and things, so let's get a sense of perspective. Now, let me check this here, make sure I get down. So, the good news, I think my thumb is flicking on this, I apologize, about change symptoms is, the good news is, you can take something and chunk it down into smaller pieces and look at what it is that you have to do. Sometimes you need someone you can talk to, and I always say that if you have a lot of stuff going on in your workplace and you're feeling overwhelmed, sit down with a friend who doesn't necessarily know much about the subject and have them ask questions and make a printed list like this on a flip chart that everyone can look at and start breaking down the individual pieces. That's a lot of what I do as a consultant. I'm not smarter than my clients by any means. They know more than me about their situation. They're too close. And so what I bring is sort of an objectivity. Oh, what's that purple thing flying over there? Is it supposed to be purple? Is it supposed to be flying? Does anyone know it? Does it belong to anyone or just flew in the window? I mean, that's sometimes all I'm doing. And then say, okay, let's write it down on a list so we can see what's going on. So what I'd like to do is take a look at this idea of internal and external locus. And this is one of the models that can be so important in helping people deal with communication. And I'm going to ask you folks to turn to page 10 of your handout as we go through this. Because when we talk about improving the discipline of communication during times of change, we're talking about being precise in what we're saying and doing. And the model that we're going through, having to do with the 2 sets of communication, have a lot to do with this. Now, I'm going to move forward to a different, okay, I'm going to move forward to this and then we'll go back here. During times of change, when people are under stress, misunderstandings tend to increase. Disagreements tend to increase. People's mistakes tend to increase. And a lot of people feel more bad will toward people. You know, they're more suspicious, they're less accommodating. And part of it is all those bad chemicals coursing. So what we want to talk about briefly is the idea of what we call the two conflicting rules. What it is when you're sending information to other people and what it is when you're receiving information from other people. And this is one of the ways I find that you can really clean up communication. So I'm going to take you through this little model, then we're going to stop and see what would be the issues to make it difficult. So while you're watching this and making notes, be thinking to yourself, would this be hard for me to do or to do better? And if so, hard, would this be hard for a friend of mine to do? What would be hard about it? And again, the page that we're on in the paper is page 10, where it says the two sets of contradictory communication rules. And this is slide 22 on your slide handout. So what it says is that there's two conflicting rules, two sets of skills in effect. When you are sending a message to another person, and when we say you're sending a message, I mean the look on your face, the tone of your voice, the words that you use in writing, what you choose to wear, your gestures, your posture, the speed in which you talk. I mean, the whole package, you're sending message. We're constantly sending messages. And part of the process of becoming an adult is taking responsibility for the messages you're sending and knowing more and more about how to send successful messages. So how many people either here, and you can raise your hand, remember I can see you in the ether, how many people here have ever lived with a teenager? Has anything lived with a teenager? Okay. Some of you who've lived with teenagers perhaps remember the day when your teenager first went out into the world to get a real job, and they come into the kitchen dressed in whatever the unspeakable fashion is of their particular generation. And the parental unit looks at them and says, you cannot go to your job interview dressed that way. And the teenager says, this is America. I can dress any way I want. And the parental unit says, yes, sweetheart, but there are consequences. You can go and do whatever you want, but there are consequences. The first rule of communication says we send messages and we have to be responsible for the consequences. We can't be 100% responsible for exactly what the other person's response is, but to a good sense of the word, we can be responsible most of the time for how other people are going to react to us when we're sending messages out into the world. I tell people this is why I think it's so important to have people at the front line in a library who like human beings, who like teenagers and children, so that the first thing that kid sees when they walk into a library is a human being looking at them like they're glad to see them. What doesn't work is if you have a human being at that counter protecting the library from the barbarian hordes, and you can tell because that's the look on their face. And as somebody approaches them, the look on their face is, okay, bucko, I know what's on your mind. You try any funny business, right? Rather than, hi, good to see you, right? And I have watched unthinking library staff put the chip on the shoulder of that kid, where the kid's coming in kind of neutral and they look at the adult who's looking at them like they're just about to steal something, and guess what? The kid's whole posture, mannerism, everything changes. So what we want to do is to make sure that we're doing our best to send the right message to people. And remember, we're dealing with an irrational species, so things like how you dress, how you comb your hair, but more importantly, how you smile, the tone of your voice makes a big difference. Okay, now this deals with human physiology. Women tend to have more fat under their skin, okay? So as a female, I have more fat under my skin. Also, my husband, as typical of many males, has shaved most days of his life. He has massaged his skin, his face since puberty, does certain things. That's not true of all men, but for a lot of men. So consequently, My husband's skin and texture and tone is much more toned than I am as a woman. As I get older, my face is more likely to sag, I get jowls, I get the lines here and everything. Well, studies have shown that as we get older, our facial expressions are more likely to be interpreted as being angry. They've done these generational studies where they've taken pictures of people at 10-year intervals and then showed them to children. And the exact same person showing the exact same expression of their face looks angry when they're 70, when they don't look angry when they're 30. Why? Because of gravity. And it happens more for women than men. So for those of us, and again, I'm in my 60s, I have to smile more. I have to be more conscious that my normal flat face, in effect, is more off-putting as I get older. I mean, it doesn't sound like a big deal, but do people see you warm and friendly, or do they see you stern and uninviting? And you can't simply say like their teenager, well, that's their problem. If they have a problem with me, that's their problem. No, because you've chosen to work in public sector in a government-supported agency. So yes, there is an impact that you have. I'm not saying that we all have to dress up. I'm not saying that we have to be fancy or perky or anything like that. But civility can't be the same when we're 60 as it was when we're 30. We have to try a little harder. So, responsible consequences, these are the foundation ideas in behavioral science. My behavior has an impact, on other people. And it's not just your age or your gender, but also your status in the library. If I'm a page and I walk through the library and I'm not smiling, no one's going to notice. If I'm the director and I walk through the library and I'm not smiling, a whole bunch of people are going to say, did you see that Pat wasn't smiling? Oh my God, she must have gotten that financial report from the board. Oh, we're all fired. This, I mean, really, I've seen people go from 0 to 80, in the matter of a minute or two, because the director doesn't realize the power that he or she has. Yes? Oh, okay, that's okay. That's all right. So we want to be responsible for the details of the message. Now, the other side is about when we're receiving messages from other people. When instead of being the sender, we are, in effect, the observer. When we're seeing and hearing the messages that other people are sending to us. And people are always sending us messages. Now, this is where we have to do something totally different, which is why we call it the two conflicting ways of thinking about communication. When we're sending it, we are responsible for the consequences of our behavior. But what about when somebody's sending a message to you? Well, what's different is we can't read another person's mind. And we know that people are going to be very stressed out during times of change. So what we want to be able to do is to give people the benefit of the doubt. To be able to say, perhaps. So here's an example. Everyone's been to those workshops on nonverbal communication. Can I say crap? Most of them are crap. But anyway, and people can use the chat box in for Joe on this, and we'll see if our colleagues in the room have an idea. What is this supposed to mean?
Closed off.
Closed off. Anything else? Cold, right? Closed off. Well, yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. Closed off. So this is supposed to be emotionally closed off, distant, disapproving, and everything. However, what could be a totally rational reason why someone's doing this that has nothing to do with emotions? They're freezing cold, right? They could be cold. They could be sitting in a chair that doesn't have armrests, so they don't know what else to do with their hands. They could have, like I do, carpal tunnel, and sometimes if my arm has swelled a little bit, this is a comfortable position to put my arm in, so it's a little bit more comfortable this way. So there's a whole bunch of different reasons that have nothing to do with my, quote, emotional state. And I think that a lot of the people who teach classes on interpreting nonverbal communication fail to emphasize the importance of context. I was teaching this class to a group of police cadets in Denver, and I was talking about posture and everything, and we're talking about interpreting people's posture. And I pointed to one of the young men in the class, and I said, well, you're all slumped up, and you're this and this and this. I said, your posture is terrible. What does that say? And he looked at me, he said, man, I'm 6'6", and I'm sitting in a chair that was designed for people who are 5'5". I'm sitting this way because there's nowhere else to sit. And we were all laughing. We gave him a round of applause, but it was true. But I could see someone coming in and saying, see what a difficult person he is because he's slouched down. And he was very kindly trying to accommodate himself in a chair that was at least 2 sizes small. I mean, it's sometimes that commonsensical. So we want to give people the benefit of the doubt when we're receiving messages from them and acknowledge a very important thing. We'll probably never know why they're behaving the way they're behaving. And this is a truism in cognitive psychology. Cognitive psychology is how the brain works. Behavioral psychology is how human beings interact with each other and cause and effect. And one of the most important concepts in cognitive psychology is that we get to choose our responses to other people. We're not perfect at it. It takes some of us longer than others. Some things we never manage to do. But most people, most of the time, under most circumstances, can learn a different way to respond to the behavior of people around them, regardless of their age. And I say this from personal experience. And I say this also from observing my clients over the years about people learning new things. We give people benefit of the doubt, and we say, perhaps. Okay, so here's the scenario, and I'd like to get some feedback from people here and from the ether. Somebody does something you don't like, does a behavior you don't like. What if you imagined someone you personally knew and respected doing the same behavior? What would be your response? What would be your response, in other words, if someone you liked did a behavior you didn't like? What do you think is a typical response? Anyone? And raise your hand, please. Yes?
Well, I think you'd probably cut them a little slack.
Very good. And by the way, I've asked this question of dozens, if not hundreds of audiences all over North America and in Europe, and every single audience says the same thing. If it was someone I knew, I would be more likely to cut them some slack and give them the benefit of the doubt. What else do you think they say? If it was someone you knew and did something you didn't like. The second thing I hear, oh, cool, go ahead.
Well, you might understand something that's going on in your life that might have contributed to the
Very good. You'd have a perhaps or something, you'd have some personal knowledge. Excellent, excellent. Another thing that we hear from people is, well, if it was someone I knew and liked, I'd be more likely to go up to them and ask them what's wrong. And this is consistent through all the folks I've talked with in Western Europe and in the United States. And I'm not saying this is 100% because I haven't talked to 100% of people, but it's sad in a way that we are that much more willing to give people known to us the benefit of the doubt, even if we don't have more information about the situation. So that kind of kindly generosity is something that sometimes disappears when we're going through change because we're stressing out so much. So the rules go something like this, that if we're sending the message, we will be conscious of the fact that we probably need to improve, we probably need to do something different, and we might need to get feedback from people. This is why I encourage people during times of heavy change in your lives to find a friend at work or at home who will tell you the truth about your own behavior, so that you have someone who can give you a little feedback if you're starting to go off track. My problem is when I'm impatient, I snap at people. And I have a husband who will tell me the truth. So if we're under heavy deadlines, he will just very kindly say, Pat, shut up. But he says it nicer than that because I'm doing that kind of bullying behavior. And on the other hand, if someone is doing something and you're watching it, why not give them the benefit of the doubt? Even if you know for sure they have something in mind that is ill-intended, it will soften your attitude toward them and send a better message to people around. It doesn't mean you don't hold them accountable. We do want to hold people accountable, but we don't have to create a whole negative backstory about why they're doing what they're doing about things. Does this make sense to folks? Sort of. Okay, so here's the question I was going to ask at the beginning. What's difficult about the conflicting rules? What's difficult about doing this in real life? And we'll see if any of the folks out in the ether want to chat Joe about it, and we'll see if anyone in the room has something. What would you say is difficult about following these two rules?
It takes effort.
Yes, it does. It's conscious, right? I mean, this doesn't work going on automatic. And that's one of the things, it takes that extra little piece of work that we're sometimes exhausted during times of change. Excellent. Anyone else?
I think you might be inclined to assume that people are going to give you the benefit of the doubt. They know what I meant.
Very good. Very good. When I first learned this model, I was very resistant to it because I didn't think it was fair. I first of all said, how about other people being responsible for the messages they're sending? I was very focused on other people's mistakes. I was kind of an unpleasant person, actually. So it was like, you ought to be responsible, you ought to behave. But moi, oh no, you should give me the benefit of the doubt because I am only well-intended. And this reverses it. And I have this one lady I know in the Colorado library community who comes to my programs, and she makes this big joke when she's there to people, and she says, she'll raise her hand and she says, when can I not be responsible? Pat, I want to come to one of your workshops where I'm not responsible for my own behavior. I'm sick and tired that I'm the one. And everyone's laughing and she's laughing. And she said, so when do I get to be the jerk? Can I have that workshop where I can just be the jerk? And I said, that's not the one I teach. I said, I try hard enough in my life not to be a jerk and fail that I'm not going to teach other people how to be a jerk. But you know, I've seen workplaces where people really tried to practice this, and it made an enormous difference. I was working with doing in-house training for elementary schools in Jefferson County, and one of the schools was having a lot of problems, so I went in for an in-service at the beginning of the year, and we went through a whole bunch of different communication models. People really got into it. About 6 months later, they hired in 2 substitute teachers who just started to go at it. And the principal called me up and said, you probably would be interested in this, but they had to send a mediator from the school system to work with these 2 difficult people. And the mediator said, it's remarkable how these 2 ladies' bad behavior did not infect the rest of the school. People had been vaccinated against the bad behavior because they just did not get engaged. And if there was a question or a problem, they said, well, perhaps they're having a bad day, and then we just kind of go back to work. And they were very impressed. So I know that this can help. This can help. Do we have any comments from our folks in the world?
Yeah, we have a few. The first is that the fact that it can be difficult when others forget to give you the benefit of the doubt.
Yes. Yes, definitely.
The second comment, online communication can be misinterpreted more.
Oh, I'm so glad we said that. May I interrupt here? Is that okay? The more change that's going on, the less you should rely on online communication. And online communication should only be about facts, not emotions. So you can tell people the time and date of something. You can ask them a simple technical question, and that's about it. But no long tirades, no trying to work out a problem or issue. You need the sound of the person's voice at the minimum, and that's part of the management overhead during change is face-to-face. Nothing works in our species better than face-to-face. I mentioned this morning asking some friends of mine advice about the importance of face-to-face meetings to corporate executives, and one part I didn't say from this morning that they told me. These are both men with PhDs and very brilliant and had worked for large multinational corporations. And the question I originally asked them was, how important was it to have face-to-face meetings? And they had said a whole bunch of stuff has to happen face-to-face in supervision. But the part I didn't mention from this morning that they both said was, why do you think we spend so much money flying people around the world? Even with video conferencing, there are times that if it's an important enough meeting, it happens face-to-face. And even in this age of high-tech stuff, when my husband's private clients who are people like venture capitalists and people doing big, high deals, you know what? They fly in. And he's got one inventor he works with who's very poor, lives hand to mouth, hasn't hit the big time. But when Peter has to have an important meeting, he borrows the money and gets on a plane. And I think that's something that there's a idea of maybe a false efficiency doing so much by email and so on. I use email to confirm information. I also use it to have a public record so that people can share stuff. But if I have something I really have to discuss with someone, I pick up the phone. That thing. So, was there anything else?
Well, and following up, someone says, unless you're Charles Dickens, yes, it's hard to make tone of voice clear in text. And then also the comment, just the fact that body language is, habit, so it's hard to break that.
We have a little bit I'm going to give you on nonverbal communication today that works pretty good, and it doesn't require you having a face transplant or anything like that. So I'll be interested to hear from people if you try playing with the two rules of communication and seeing how this works. So another idea that comes out of this idea of internal versus external, being responsible. And I'm mentioning this because I'm mentioning this particular model. We're going to look at it quickly before our next break, because this particular model has been around for many years. It's taught in business schools, and it's taught in what they call the applied communication schools as a very practical tool. It's also somewhat controversial, and I'd be interested to see what people's reaction is to it. It's about whether or not you are someone who mostly has an external locus of control or an internal locus of control. Locus is the L-O-C-U-S is the Latin word for point. We have words like location that come from this. And the idea is, do you decide for yourself inside what needs to be done, or do you put your power to make decisions outside yourself? So the external locus of control person really gets hammered during times of change, because one of the reasons that they feel so helpless, they've given all their power outside of them. And you can hear them say these things. I'm not responsible for my life. Wasn't my fault. And we tell people there's a difference between fault and responsibility. It is not my fault that it snows in Colorado. I have no power over that. However, and I say this being part Romanian, I know for a fact I was not captured by gypsies at birth, held at gunpoint, drugged, and then wake up and say, oh my goodness, I'm 64 years old. How did I end up in Colorado? I have people who they think what, they went into a drug fever for 30 years and suddenly, it's not my fault I work in a library. No, I understand you were captured by space aliens and they did a brain transplant and you were under drugs all that time, right? So people say I'm not responsible for my life. In cognitive and behavioral psychology, and you've probably heard this a million times, people say it's not that you're responsible for what happened to you. You're responsible for how you respond to what happens to you. You're maybe not responsible that you got sick, but you are to a certain extent responsible for how you responded afterwards, and that's what we're talking about. I'm not responsible for my behavior, including my responses to other people. So I have family members who basically had two career choices growing up. They could become professionals or members of the mob, right? Good old west side of Chicago. And I thought it was really cool when I was 10 years old in Chicago, and my mother and I were watching the news, WBBM probably, and my mother said a bad word. And I was like, Ma, 10 years old. And she started laughing, and she pointed to the TV station, and they showed a mobster, a Chicago mobster, during the perp walk, you know, where he was handcuffed and going off or something like that. And Mom said, "That's the guy who introduced me to your dad. I used to date him." In high school, I was like, whoa, you know. But those were the days, were the things. But my parents talked a lot about the fact that a lot of people they knew made a choice. You could sign up with the mob or you couldn't, but it was a choice. And my dad was offered a position with one of the Jewish mobs in Chicago, and he didn't say no thank you. He put his hands over his ears and went, no, I can't hear you, blah, 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 like this, and walked away in the courthouse for that. So when people say I'm not responsible for my behavior, including my responses to other people, we are more than we think we are. Success is a magical accident, and this is something I learned from a therapist named Laurie Weiss. She and her husband John were instrumental in founding the transactional analysis movement, the TA movement, you know, I'm okay, you're okay, those folks. And she said that people who don't get what they want from life sometimes revert to what we call magical thinking. Magical thinking is like doing the right thing and working hard and stuff never works, so instead I'll burn a green prosperity candle, or instead I'll go to a class about doing something else, or I'll just hope really hard. I'll just hope like really, really hard that something is going to happen. So I have a friend who can't find a job right now. He's in a very bad state, and he's been sitting at home for 7 months not finding work. And his sister, who's a live wire, also was out of a job 7 months ago, but her response was to find a scholarship for a free program. She went to classes, she went out and she networked and did stuff. She's now got a great job. And they both, were equally intelligent with the same skill sets. But the guy, his name is Tom. Tom was into magical thinking. If I just sit home and I'm really depressed, something will happen to make things better. Does anyone here have a friend or relative who does magical thinking? You know, it's just very painful to watch. And so you watch the people who are the external locus of control. My control in life is outside of me, so nothing's going to work, so magical thinking is as good as anything else. I react instead of anticipate and plan. There have been so many studies that show that people who are able to look into the future and set a plan do better. And not only do they do better, but it's also that thing of they plan for misfortune. Growing up, my father was actually the chief pathologist of the Cook County Coroner's Office in the 50s and 60s. I know how to kill everyone in this room and not get caught. And it was a CSI family. It was kind of cool. And my dad didn't want my sister and myself to be negative people when we were growing up, so he taught us to deal with change. And one of the things we played a lot growing up was what was called the what if game. And so we'd be driving someplace, he'd say, okay kids, we're gonna do the what if game. What if you girls go into the ladies' room at the gas station here, and you come out and the car's gone? What would you do? What if you come home from school for lunch, and your mom's not there? What do you do? And this is how my mom and dad had the conversation with us about which family member we might want to go to if something happened. So we play the what if game a lot. People who are good at change management play the what if game. External locus of control people tend to react because they don't think about the future. And finally, that whole thing about I don't believe I can use a new behavior of some kind. On the other hand, internal locus of control is something we sometimes call emotional maturity. I believe I'm responsible for the choices I make. I believe I can mostly choose how I respond to life, including how I respond to other people's behavior. I believe success is knowable and replicable. I can figure out how to be more successful in life and do something concrete about it. I can find out how to get what I want. I can make a phone call. I can do research. I can ask people who are successful. I can find out things. And finally, I can learn new behavior. So I hope that as we go through times of change, people find themselves being more and more internal locus of control things. So I just want to mention this really quick before we take our next break. We want you to set your priorities, and the number one priority you need to set during times of change is your own health. Not the health of your children, your spouse, your partners, your extended family, Put yourself first. Take care of yourself, and please avoid habits that hurt your body. This is something I've talked a lot with my employees about, particularly having to do with alcohol and recreational drug use. By the way, if you stop and ask 99.99% of Coloradans what the impact has been for legalizing marijuana, they're going to say nothing. The world is not different. We don't have like stoned hippies, falling down in the middle of major highways. In fact, there has been a decrease in crime, and a decrease in overdoses, and a decrease in hospitalizations since the whole thing has started. The only bad thing we know right now about the marijuana issue is that they've been scarfing up, the marijuana companies have been scarfing up good property, which has helped drive up the cost of rents in Denver. That's about the big effect we've seen so far. So avoid habits that hurt your body, whatever that means to you, but some people do indulge a little bit as a stress factor. It doesn't really help them too much. And set your own goals. Set your own goals. I had a lady come to me and say, the change stress we're going through is driving me crazy in my library. What should I do? I'm hypersensitive to other people's mistakes. I'm always worried. I'm always concerned. And I said, well, I think it's time for you to go back to school. She said, what? And I said, well, if you're taking a class and worried about things like your reading assignments, your writing assignments, your grades, that's more interesting a thing to worry about than the look on somebody's face or the tone of their voice. You'll be thinking about something productive rather than something like, well, what am I going to do about Madge or something like that. So I really think that these are issues that help people a lot. And these are some of the typical positive goals that we look for in people who are going through change. What to make you happy and so on. And it could be anything from celebrate something, to organize a fundraiser, have a potluck. It doesn't have to be big and earth-shaking. It can be fun. But just the process of putting together something and organizing it and having people come together can help you during times of change. So I'm going to leave it with this, and leave this slide on instead of the break slide when we take our final break. And let me read this out loud. People who don't create personal and professional goals to engage their hearts and mind are more likely to be drawn into negative feelings, thoughts, and actions. As I said before, that we actually become addicted to anger and fear, and the bad things in our lives substitute for the good things, and those bad things become potent ways we create meaning and purpose. So one of the things we have to think about is what's going to give us meaning and purpose during times of change that may have nothing to do with what's happening in our library. So let's take a 6-minute break. We'll come back and we'll finish up. Libraries and so on is one of the first victims because, again, it's one of those things I don't have time for, and we create problems for people and ourselves. Somebody had asked if they could use this and put this up in their break room as a slide. None of the information that I'm giving you is copyright protected. I'm flattered to hear how you use it, but go ahead and use anything you want, okay? And if I'm pressed upon it, I may be able to even remember the people I stole it from. How's that, okay? So this is how to keep your cool. First of all, keep your agreements with people. You want to be the trustworthy person. If you say you're going to get something done by Friday, get it done by Friday. Keep to your own business. When people come up to gossip about ain't things awful, one of the ways to politely cut them off is to say, I appreciate that you're coming up and telling me these things. However, your relationship with your manager really isn't my business. Is there anything else you want to talk about? And I think that sometimes people say, oh, I'm just the listening ear. No, by listening, you give people tacit approval. Be careful of saying that everybody should be venting all the time. It really doesn't work. Put very little energy into other people's business. Beware of becoming a rescuer. We sometimes, during times of change, hide information. And when I say we hide information, we keep rescuing each other so the people at the top don't know how bad things are. I've seen, for example, when there was a cutback in a tech services area and people weren't able to meet their goals, instead of being very forthright as a group and saying, here's what we're doing, here's the problems we're having, this is what we need, everyone kind of secretly worked evenings and weekends to make up the slack because they didn't want to look bad in the eyes of their bosses. Well, all this did was tell the bosses that everything was fine. So then when the staff started to complain, and by that time they were very, very bitter, the administrator said, well, you've been telling us everything's fine for months. Why is it suddenly not fine? So there is a temptation to hide mistakes and such, but in the long term, that kind of hiding of bad information is going to bite you, for sure. Hang around other productive people. Start looking around at your library, people in your life, and say, who do I want to hang out with? Who has a positive attitude, who's successful about life? My husband works with some very successful businessmen and women who've really made it well in the world. And one thing I noticed about the successful people he hangs out with is they never blame and they never complain. Isn't that interesting? Now, it doesn't mean that they might not speak up if something's wrong. They might write a letter, attend or something, but they don't whine all the time about stuff. If there's a problem, they do something about the problem, but they don't entertain themselves by, let's go out to lunch and complain. I was working with a large academic library in the West during a very ugly time of change. And what had happened was that the much beloved dean of the library was fired, which really upset everyone. They didn't like the new dean at all. And so I walked in one day and a group of people from the library were sitting having lunch in the cafeteria, and they were pretty upset about things going on. And I said, look, I'm a consultant. I have no stake in what's going on. Nobody can do anything to me. Let me go across to the dean's office and see if I can set up a meeting of some kind. So I walked over to the dean's office, met with the secretary, and the secretary said, oh, the dean knows, and it was the deans of the liberal arts department. The dean knows that people have a lot of questions about what's going on. He's very happy to meet with people. And I said, great. I said, what's his calendar? I have a group of academic librarians who would like to meet with him. She said, look, it's wide open. I'm going to be here all day. All they have to do is come in, plug it in. And I said, will he meet with a group of people at a time or just individuals? Oh no, he'll meet with a group, no problem. So you see where this is coming. I went back to the group at lunch who were still there, and I said, good news. The dean is open with meeting with you. The secretary's there right now. She'll be there till the end of the day. You can call her, whatever, set up a time, and you can meet with him and express your concerns. Okay, folks. So I come back a month later for my next class that I was teaching, and anyone want to guess how many of the librarians from that meeting, who were, by the way, tenured faculty and untouchable, actually went and sat down with the dean and talked about their issues? Thank you. 0. And they were still talking with the same fervor they were a month before. So I sort of said, I love you guys, but a pox on your houses. And a few months later, I got a call from someone who said, would you help us? Because we're trying to oust the old dean and do this and this. And I said, no. I said, I did not see the folks making the kind of productive action that I think was worthwhile. And so I don't have much trust in anything going on. And the school was sold. It was an oh well, and no, they don't have a library anymore. So I want to find productive people to be around. I want to be around people who teach me how to solve problems during times of change. And then develop healthy distressors of different kinds, things that don't involve stuffing my face with food. And I'm not much of a drinker, and I don't do drugs. I mean, I would point you to a phone book if you came to Colorado looking for marijuana. I wouldn't know where to do it. But what are healthy distressors? Is it laughter? Is it hanging around with fun family? Is it doing exercise with friends? Is it, if you love pets and don't have room, it's about going over to the shelter and walking the dogs, all sorts of things we can do in life to be healthy about de-stressing ourselves. Now, this is the part that we were talking about with sending and receiving, okay? A couple of more things. First of all, writing things down tends to lower emotionality. And here's an interesting factoid, and this came from a study that was reported in Prevention Magazine a few years ago, which has amazing stuff about health, in my opinion. they were taking a look at what were things to help people deal with chronic pain. And if you've ever had chronic pain, you know it's just so emotionally debilitating. So they put together a couple of groups, and they had this particular group were the people who would sit and talk about it, a support group, right, where people would meet and talk about their pain and how they were dealing with it. They had a different group that journaled, and those groups would meet, that group would meet, but they wouldn't talk to each other. They would just write about their pain. And all the people in the group were on pain medication. There was a double-digit significant decrease in the amount of pain medication taken by people who wrote things down over people who just talked about them. And I love studies like this because there's an outside measure, right? And that was pretty significant to the researchers, that people were able to start backing off of their pain meds because they were writing things down. I've been in front of an angry mob of people at a community meeting, really angry about something. And when we started writing things down on the big board and having people come up and write things down, you could literally watch the emotionality drain out of their faces and bodies. Where they started, and I'm going to move, I hope the camera can do this, they started looking at this as ideas to ponder, almost as if they took on a life of their own. That by writing things down, you could kind of walk around it and think about it. When you're only thinking and talking about something, for a lot of people, it's like a little mouse running around in a spinning wheel in your head. Nothing gets resolved. But I've seen over and over people better at problem solving when they write things down. And this is so important. If it is not physical evidence, it is rumor and hearsay. So again, during times of change, there's all kinds of rumors going around. And I'm one of those people bring in, where I'm standing in a room full of very nice people, very upset, and I've had people raise their hand and saying, why is the board firing everyone? And I have a simple thing I ask people at that time, which is, how do you know that's true? How do you know that's true? Well, I just know the board. Was that something that was issued? Did somebody say it? And we've actually traced down rumors. And I'll tell you, the amazing number of rumors I've heard started where the person said, in effect, well, I thought the person might say something like that. And that's where the rumor started. I thought you might say something like that. So I just told everybody that was going on. So being able to write things down and find actual evidence that something's going on, if you're really good at that, you become like the foundation keystone for your organization. It's part of my husband's success during time of change with his clients because he's unflappable. I mentioned, I think before, my husband's originally from Texas, and there's a wonderful Texas joke about this. There's a big Texas guy at a bar, you know, big guy drinking, and at the end of the bar is a little guy yapping at him, and, oh, I hate Texans, and oh, going on. And finally the big guy can't take it anymore, and he strolls over to the little guy and he says, listen, if I find out you hit me, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. And I think that my husband's like that big St. Bernard dog or big Newfoundland dog. And when people are all upset about something, he takes complaints and concerns seriously, but he doesn't allow himself to be overwhelmed by the yapping. And he's the one in the room who will cheerfully say, that's interesting. How do we know this is true? Let's do science. Let's call up. Let's get the document. Let's find out what's really going on, rather than let's sit here for 3 hours and complain about something that we have no idea if it's true or not. So that is an enormous way that you can help your workplaces with things. So what I say to the change agents in the workplace, whether they're the managers, supervisors, leaders, is one of the ways you can build that framework, if you're that player in the role coming from the top down, is to establish workplace goals that are written down for everybody to see every single day. Even if you have a lot of part-timers, people can go back and check in the staff room and see what was written down that day to get an idea what's going on. Second, establish workplace priorities. I was working with a government agency a few years ago that was going through a very bad time, and they literally, I'm not exaggerating, didn't know if they were still going to be around by the end of the month because Congress was in session and this particular agency was up for review. So isn't it wonderful that you're going to work every day listening to NPR and they're discussing whether or not you're going to have a job or a career or a life by the end of the month? So what we did is we had a meeting of all the leadership, and we set the workplace goals and the priorities for the next month. And what was interesting, the situation hadn't changed, but people who left those meetings at the end of the day were smiling because now they knew what to do and they knew what the priorities were. And it helped them get through that particular period of time feeling productive and much more emotionally healthy than they were before. Check in daily. I mentioned before that one of the things I hear from people that they resent the most about their directors during time of change is that sense of abandonment of the people who are working in the library, because so much of the attention is on what's going outside, which is how it should be. But I really encourage my directors that they should not underestimate how much it means to people when you check in and say, hey, good job, this is a hard time, tell me what you're doing. Even though it might not be part of the director's job, it's people like you're remembering who we are and you care about us. One of my non-library clients was the Denver Election Commission years ago. And it's one of those jobs where you work really, really hard for 8 months and then you do next to nothing for 4 months. And we talked about the relationship of the elected officials with the people who worked at the Election Commission. And they said, well, there's some people who send us flowers at the end of an election, and some send us candy, and so on. But the ones that really mean something to it is when the official himself or herself shows up and spends 10 minutes just walking through the desk saying, good job, thank you, and thanking people personally. Takes 10 minutes out of their life, it means everything to us. So this is kind of important, and make it transparent. Spend that little extra time so everybody knows what everybody else is doing, and you don't have to keep secrets unless you are legally obligated to. Do that as well. Remember I said that drama is addictive. Well, what are some of the symptoms? One is words instead of action. People talk and talk and talk and talk, and they don't take action. When I started in the workplace, I was a poet. There wasn't as much money in poetry as I was personally led to believe. And so I did other things in life. But I had a mentor who's a very famous Wisconsin poet. And he told me something interesting. He said there's two kinds of poets. He said, when you go to a retreat or a conference having to do with writing and poetry, there's one kind of poet who sits in the bar all night drinking and talking about being a poet. There's another kind of poet that you never see because they're in their motel room writing. And he pointed a finger at me. He said, guess which one I want you to be. So there's a lot of people during times of change who talk and talk and talk and talk, but then there's the other ones who are quietly taking action. Reliving past mistakes over and over, and again, reliving other people's past mistakes over and over again. So that's definitely a symptom. Exaggeration. I spend some of my time working with conflict management in change situations where someone says things to me like, I am afraid for my life every week I work for this library. That's a direct quote. And I say, okay, let's find out when this happens. And by the time you're done, you find out that it wasn't once a week, that maybe it was once every 2 or 3 months, and they weren't really afraid for their lives. They were just made uncomfortable by somebody who came in a little drunk or was dressed like a homeless person. Well, there's a big difference between saying I'm afraid for my life every week and, yeah, this annoying guy comes in every 2 or 3 months. So we want people to be accurate. As I mentioned before, provides meaning and purpose. Oh, hi, welcome to the library. I really get off on telling newcomers how much I hate the place and why this is a despicable place. Let me take you to lunch, girlfriend, so that you despise the place as much as I do. And the other thing is, and we can see this in life, enemies make us feel important. That's the attraction that our species has, you know, the us-them syndrome. It gives me status to have people I hate. And, oh, good, you can hate them too, and we can all hate them together. So be careful about that. Also, we mentioned before this issue of fighting manipulation. We got to be very, very careful. People will flatter us with secrets during times of change, which is one reason I want things being transparent. They will ask us to keep secrets. They will talk about rumors and so on. Transparency tends to breed trust and respect. So be one of the people who doesn't keep secrets. So these were symptoms that we talked about at the beginning of the day, and I hope you'll take a look at these and think about if you can address them better now than you could at the end of the program. And I picked 4 authors who deal with change. All of these are people who've written multiple books. All of these are classic books, and all of these books have been around for a long time. The only one who is still alive is Martin Seligman. Nathaniel Branden recently passed on, just a few days ago actually, and he writes books on self-esteem based on personal responsibility. Some of his books have been in print for decades, so I encourage you to look up his books. Martin Seligman is a behavioral cognitive scientist from the West Coast, and the book that I like best of his books is the book on Learned Optimism, which is probably his most famous book, and he's also written a book which I like very much called Authentic Happiness, which is really about how we can choose a better way of thinking about the world. Virginia Satir was a clinical psychologist from the 20th century who's given credit, along with a man named Milton Erickson, for inventing the field of family therapy. And she has a number of books out that really talk in part about forgiveness. So what do you do when someone has done something really, really bad to you, and how do you forgive them? And finally, Viktor Frankl, who was chosen as one of the most influential authors of the 20th century. At the beginning of World War II, he was considered the top neurosurgeon and the top psychiatrist in Europe. And he survived 4 concentration camps. And in his work in something called logotherapy, Professor Frankl discovered that having compelling positive meaning and purpose was one of the factors that predicted which people would survive the concentration camps. It wasn't age, it wasn't health, it wasn't gender, it wasn't religious fervor, it was their ability to set a goal. So these are all authors who have tons of stuff online. The books have been in print forever. I encourage you to take a look at them. So I'm going to leave this up here. I don't charge for email or phone consultation. You have all my contact and all my social media. So what I'd like you to do is, if you could pick up, please, your handout. And what I'd like to do is to flip forward to page 5. And I'm going to give you folks a little written exercise to do that has to do with page 5, 6, and 7. Now, first of all, for full disclosure, I am not a librarian, and I don't play one on TV. However, I have been spending most of my life, the last 35 years, around you folks. So these are not things other people have told me. These are things that I have witnessed myself, okay? So I'm nobody's mouthpiece about change in libraries. So there, first of all, are trends to consider, but I want to go down to these 4 library principles on page 5 that are based on some very simple ideas. And then we're going to take a look at what's changing, and I'm going to ask you to go through and check for yourself to see what your library might be doing in these areas, okay? First of all, that a library more and more is a space designed for people first, not for books or computers. There's more space for people to interact, more different uses of the building that there were before. Number 2, that materials more and more are organized around topics and themes, not just Dewey or LC. And there's a whole different way that materials are being treated. And I know that for some people it is anathema that traditional cataloging does not drive library organization the way it might have done a few years ago. But somehow the time-space continuum hasn't collapsed, but maybe it will. You know, there was this whole joke about the introduction of blank verse into American poetry at the beginning of 20th century. And the joke is, people said that if we no longer have verse that rhymes, it will be the end of Western civilization. And then people say, we told you so, you know, so no, it's not the end of civilization. And then the whole thing about material is fresh, that less emphasis on mending and tech services, more in display. And finally, and this is the big one for a lot of libraries, the changing scope of services. Never knew a public library do that, and we've seen this more and more. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to kind of go through a list let you folks check off 2 things on the list. The first thing is things that your library is already doing, and second, things that sound interesting. You might not even agree with them, but you're curious and might want more information about them as well. So take a look on page 6, and could you please read through the list, give you some time to work, and whatever kind of library you are or work for, if you could please check off all the things that your library is doing, and then also make a check mark about something that you might say, well, we're not doing this, but it sounds a little interesting. And I'll give you about 2 minutes to go through the list, and then we'll talk a little bit about it, and then we'll go through the other 3 lists as well, okay? And I'm gonna go sit down, and I'll be back in like a minute. Ladies and gentlemen, and looking at this list on page 6, excuse me, what's something that's a favorite of yours on the list on page 6 that your library is already working on, that you might have been doing this for years as one of the things that's changing in libraries? Does anyone here in Burr Ridge have an example of something they've witnessed firsthand at their library? Yeah, please.
One of my favorite things is that all of our new book area, the books are all shelved face out.
Very good.
So you can see the covers.
Yeah, and they've done amazing statistical stuff about how this can increase circulation. It's amazing. Anyone else have one from this list on page 6? And maybe Joe, oh yes, sir.
I'm a library trustee that recently had a construction project, and the colors of the paint that's been done is just really fantastic.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. I'm a color person, so that makes a big deal. Is there anything from this list, and do we have any folks who are coming in and not yet? Is there anything on the list, page 6, that you're curious about that you haven't done and you want any more information about? Because these are all things that I've seen, so I can, in some cases, actually direct you to the library that's doing it.
The no service desk.
Pardon?
The no service desk.
Meaning there are no service desks anymore. Right. And so people are walking around.
How that works.
Well, what it does is it forces the library staff to walk up to people and say, can I help you? The first time I encountered this was at the Denver Public Library 20 years ago, where they had just built the new library, and the Denver Public Library is the largest library between Chicago and Los Angeles, so it's quite sizable. And I'm up in the stacks, and they've moved the collection, everything's confusing, and I've got a shelf list I'm printed out, and I'm doing a research project. I'm standing there kind of in the depths of nonfiction around the 300s, like this, and I heard a little polite, And for the first time in my life, I turned, and there was a reference librarian. And, had her wings and her cape and the halo and everything, so I knew she was a reference librarian. And she said, may I help you? And I said, and it said, her name, reference librarian. And I said, well, I'm looking for this, this, and this, and blah, blah. And she said, oh, may I have your list? I said, thank you, come with me. We went over to a terminal. She typed in her secret reference number that led her to some place I had never seen before. And she went this, she said, oh, this is what happened. This is where the books are. This is what I can do. And I can fix it, so when you go downstairs, everything will be waiting for you. Do you need anything else? And I said, no. And then she left a little silver bullet and left. I mean, I had never in my life been in a library before where I was in the depths of the stack and there was a reference librarian whose whole job was to wander around looking for lost people and helping them, rather than standing behind the desk protecting the library from the barbarian hordes. And it takes some training, and some people never like it at all. But with all the modern technology that we have, it's not necessary the same way it was years ago for people to stand behind a desk. I mentioned the Farmington Public Library in New Mexico because I think it really does a phenomenal job of implementing these things. And it is very common for directors around the country to visit there because they hear so much about it. And this one director I talked to said, yeah, I went there. I was on vacation in New Mexico, didn't tell them I was director. I walked in, and I started to walk in toward the center of the library. And a very nicely dressed polite, friendly young person, obviously a page, walked up to me and said, "Welcome, may I help you? You know, what do you need?" And he said, well, it was old school. He says, "I need yellow pages because I'm doing this." And the person said, "Certainly, come with me," and led them to the place, got them the information, said, "If you need anything else, let us know. Thank you for coming in." And I said to the director, "What do you think?" And he said, "Well, I can guarantee you, it's my 20 years as a director, no one has experienced the level of service in one of my libraries that I experienced that day at the Farmington Public Library. But it takes training to help people be able to go up and walk around and talk to people. Also, it takes some dealing with status issues, because the people who I think do it best, like Canyon City Public, the support staff is all given basic reference training, and everybody at the reference desk knows to help with CERC. They also have self-checkout, and it took them 2 years to go from 0 to like 98% with self-checkout, which means that those CERC staff can also be out there doing more stuff with the patron before they get to the CERC desk. They actually have more contact with the patron than they did before. And Karen put together a really great way of training and everything that worked very well. And not only is Farmington poor, it's rich and poor, but they have 4 of the largest tribal nations that they serve, right? So they serve the Southern Ute, Mountain Ute, Navajo, and Hopi. So they have rich oil men and people who live in the 18th century on the reservations. And she said that she knew it was going to be successful when she watched one Navajo grandmother teaching another Navajo grandmother how to use the self-checkout. Right? So it's more than just middle-class people. They had to teach a whole bunch of people who live without electricity how to use self-checkout, freeing everybody for more face-on-face customer service time with their customers. Anything else about page 6? Please.
Just a question and a comment. So one person was wondering about the no signs at Farmington and how that works, or any explanation you can give about that.
Right, and this is an eccentricity that some people like, some people don't. But Karen McFeeters, the director, hates signs. And so what she said was she worked with the architect to make sure the sight lines made it obvious where things were. And also, it makes a difference where you don't have to approach a desk. There are people in a very friendly, comfortable way approaching you when you come in if you need something to do that. She also hates mess, so they eliminated all the bulletin boards. So anybody who wants to do any community stuff has to give it to them, and within an hour or two, they have it up on the big computer screens around so everybody can find. But she said, "I think it looks so tacky, it disrespects us as a library to have those dusty bulletin boards filled with, 3-year-old posters and scraps of paper and things like this." So it sort of like gets everyone to get their act together. And she said that in her library, people figure out pretty quick where to get what they want, and if they can't find it, guess what? There's somebody right there. No matter where they are, there's someone there. They don't have to walk back to the main place to find someone. Anything else?
Just the comment that, not to say you're against librarians talking to people going out, but it can be frustrating to not have a place for clients to go to get help.
Well, the interesting thing is the librarians are looking for people. That's the interesting thing, is that they have a central area, sort of, where people can hang out about stuff. But my experience, and I've been there a number of times, and I've talked to people who've been there, you have this whole support network of people who are there for you. And I think that's what makes the difference. And again, not everybody likes that style, but it certainly has been a successful library. Take a look at page 7. This has to do with 3 sets of things that I try to avoid some of the obvious stuff on Makerspace and STEAM and STEM, but there's like little and big things as well. Materials organized around topics and themes, material is fresh, and changing scope of services. So again, if you could take a look at this, check off the ones that you folks are doing, and then also if there's anything that you're curious about, more feedback about, I'd be very happy to provide that as well. So let's take a minute and see which ones on this list you're already doing. Let's start with the group here in Burr Ridge. Is there anything on page 7 that you've done? Yes, please.
We're displaying our new nonfiction in topical areas.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Very good. How about yourself? Anything from the list?
Ruthless weeding.
Say again?
Ruthless weeding.
Aha. Oh, good, good, good. Ruthless, ruthless. And it's hard sometimes, because even in the library community. I wrote a little book about books in libraries a few years ago, and the most controversial chapter that I got the worst feedback about was the weeding chapter. Whoa, people, this was theology for folks. Anything else from anyone that you've done on page 7? And anything from our folks in the ether?
We have notaries at our library.
Oh, very good.
People come in and say they didn't realize that we had that there.
That's, I think, such a nice service. And particularly, and I don't know if it's what the geography about this is, particularly with my clients in New Jersey, they said that we have such an influx of middle and upper middle class coming to work in the big companies in New Jersey who are from different countries. And things like the visa service and the notaries and stuff where they just don't know how America works, but they're educated people. They love it, and the whole family comes. They say mom and dad and all the kids come to notarize one document. And they said the secret thing is it's a way to get the parents to come in, not just the kids, and to get them to come in on weekends and evenings. One of my favorite things, there was a lady named Annette Chozik, and she's now the library director in Delta County Public Library District on the western slope of Colorado. And she was the branch manager for the Glendale Public Library. And when Annette took over the Glendale Public Library, which was basically a room in a municipal building in a suburb of Denver, she found out that they hadn't told her that 3,000 Russians had moved into the neighborhood in the weeks before as part of a project with the Jewish Community Service in the Baptist Church. So she had 3,000 Russians, most of whom did not speak English, most of whom were poor, elderly, and sick and would never become American citizens. And one of the things she discovered, they were all on special visas, but the visas had to be renewed and they had to be signed by the Russian ambassador. Well, Denver doesn't have a Russian embassy. So all these little old ladies who didn't speak English had to get on Greyhound buses and go to San Francisco to get these papers signed. So Annette found out about it, and she arranged for the Russian ambassador to come to Denver, and he would sit at her library for a couple of days and sign all these documents. And she got flack for that, not from her city government, but from some of the other librarians. This was a few years ago, who said, libraries don't do that. That is outside the scope of libraries. And Annette's response was, I'm a librarian. I can do anything. So whatever it was her people needed. The other thing was they didn't have a school district in Glendale. It's a very weird situation. So all the kids went to a school in this other county and then were shipped back to the municipal building where the library was. So you'd get all these freaked out, crazy kids coming into the library for 3 or 4 hours after school with nowhere to go. So what she did was sort of blackmail the Baptist church, which had a daycare center in the basement. And they said, look, you've helped create this by dumping hundreds and hundreds of Russian refugees in our town, and we can't deal with them. So she convinced the Baptist church to create an after-school program. So what would happen is the kids would come to the municipal building, go down to the Baptist church-run program in the basement, and then when the kids were like, had run off their energy and everything like that, they could come up to the library, by which time they were calm and had their snack and everything, and the Jewish and Russian communities chipped in to pay for some of the stuff. And she got a lot of flack for that because it was church-based. And she said, no, I really don't think the Baptist church in Colorado is set up to try to secretly convert dozens of little Russian Jewish kids. We're all working together on this. And she won awards from like Russian-speaking newspapers and Russian-American groups and the Russian government. And the interesting thing is after 5 or 10, 15 years, all the Russians either moved up, moved out, passed on, whatever, and they're using the same models for the Hispanic community as well that she did for the Russian community. Anyone else have something on page 7? Yes, please.
We have a local social service agency set up in our lobby 2 evenings a week, advising and signing people up for healthcare.
Oh, how nice. Excellent, excellent. And I've seen this more and more. One of the libraries I work with has a refugee service that actually has an office in the library because there are so many people who come in like that. We have a library in the Seattle area that for some reason they found they had a whole cluster of people who were losing their hearing late in life and going totally deaf. And they ended up being a major program, which they run and fund themselves out of a spare office in the library. And it brings in other people too who want different services and things like that. So is there anything on the list of page 7 that you're just curious about?
We are working on developing some type of a makerspace.
Oh, good.
So we're just learning about that. We applied for a grant
Mm-hmm.
to get a couple of 3D printers, and we're still waiting to hear whether we're going to get them or not.
Right.
But we have some money allocated to support the printers.
Mm-hmm.
And the board's enthused enough about it that they want to come up with a way of getting a printer whether we get the grant or not.
Good for them. That's
And,
nice.
So we're working on that, and there'll be a lot more, because we're going to have to, we'll be learning a lot. So we'll be going out and looking at some other libraries have already done it, how they're handling it. Because ours would be, we're visualizing at first something that's only available a few hours a week.
Right.
Where it'd be kind of a mobile thing where we would
Mhm.
move it into a room, because we don't have a space where we can set up a permanent thing.
Mhm.
So we'll be learning a lot, even just learning about, the other day I learned something new,
Mhm.
about that you have to be cautious of safety issues.
Yes.
That it gets hot.
Yep.
Like, oh my God.
Oh. Well, from what I've heard from people who've been involved in it, everyone I know, and everybody's different, been involved with it, is the phrase would be overwhelming success. Like my husband attended one of the events that was with the Denver Libraries, and the University of Denver had an event, and like 4 times as many kids showed up as we're playing for. So beware. Beware. Now, the reason I'm asking people to go through this particular exercise is that a lot of times the resistance to change comes from people who've never worked at other libraries. They have no idea what's going on in library land. And so all this stuff is new to them. And so when I've done staff days and we've used lists like this, it's really helped people say, oh, I get it. It's not just us, and it's not just our crazy director on drugs. You know, that it really is universal. So in the last couple of minutes, could you take a look, please, on your handout on page 18, if you would. That people get, I'm going to use the word broken sometimes during times of change. They feel that they have been, that their professionalism has been impugned. I've heard that a lot. That people don't take them seriously. And what is it if you're the only person in the room who disagrees what's going on? And so this is kind of a summary of some of what I think the issues of goodwill are. And I put them under ethics because I think ethics has a lot to do with asking questions and treating people well. So we want to take people's complaints seriously, but on the other hand, we can't have people just throwing themselves under the train so that it's 1953 again. So there's a couple things on here that I want to mention that have a lot to do with change. One of the big issues in studying ethics and practicing good library ethics is number 7 on the list, to develop a tolerance for ambiguity. People who see the world as black and white don't handle ethical conflicts very well, and they don't handle change very well. So being able to be more comfortable with the idea that you don't have the control that you think you once had, I think is an important part of change management. Perfectionists also don't handle ethical conflicts and change very well as well. People will excuse ethical lapses because they are feeling poor, tired, out of time, overworked, ignorant, revengeful, defiant, or needing to make a statement. None of these are good reasons. And finally, being annoying and rude really isn't the same as being unethical, but stop it. Just stop it. So here's some ideas about change management. I hope you'll find both the handout and the slides useful. And what I want to do is what we did this morning. I'd like people to pretend that they are putting together their own class on change management. And I'm interested to know what from the program today you would want to have in the curriculum, what you felt useful. So we'll hear from the folks who are in the ether, and hopefully we'll also hear from the folks in the room. So what's something from this afternoon that you would want to have to be in a curriculum about change management? Please.
The continuous communication that's needed.
Yes. When I was a little kid, I loved those Bible movies. And there was always these Bible movies with leprosy. And they'd have the leprosy music, you know, da, 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 whatever. And the half-veiled face and the person recoiling in horror and all that stuff. Now, some people might know the answer to this, but what is it about the leprosy bacillus that caused the terrible disfigurement that haunted people for centuries, where we were all terrified, even though leprosy is the least contagious of the contagious diseases? It's similar to tuberculosis and how it's transmitted. Anyone know how leprosy actually affects the body? Do you want to guess?
Is it the nerves?
Pardon?
The nerves?
That's right, that's right. It kills off the peripheral nerve system. It actually is an incredibly benign disease, but what happens is you can't feel if you've been injured. You can't feel if you have an infection or you've cut yourself. And as one medical librarian told me, you can't feel when the rats are gnawing at your flesh. Right? I know. So isn't it amazing that terrible disfigurement comes literally from the body not having a feedback system to know if it's injured or sick or not? That's what causes the disfigurement, not the leprosy bacillus. It doesn't do anything but eats the nervous system about things. So I tell people that it's the same thing during times of change. Don't become leprous. Don't start sort of cutting off your peripheral nervous system because it's too much trouble, and you don't want to open a can of worms by listening to people complain and talk to you about what's going on. So the continuous communication is pretty important. Anything else from this afternoon that you would want in the curriculum? Yes, please.
You listed on that last page, however you want to say it, develop a tolerance for ambiguity.
Right.
The kind of black and white syndrome that I think will plague a lot of people because we just don't live in that world. It's so much easier when things can be black and white, but very rarely is it so. Yes, and one that just came in online, recognizing the difference between a real change and a fad.
Ooh. And I have to say, in my own experience, fads, trends, and so on are, how can I say it? It's like ocean waves coming up, okay? I first heard about three-dimensional printing 20 years ago from a friend of ours named Craig Anderson, who's a bleeding edge computer programmer in Colorado Springs. And he came over to the house and said, there's this thing that's going to be called 3D printing. And it's pretty cool. And we're like, what? And he explained it all. That was 20 years ago. The concept has probably been introduced at least 10 times. And it comes up and it comes back, and it comes up and it comes back. So there's a lot of things that start out by looking like they're just a fad, and they fail, like ebooks. How many times has ebooks failed in different formats, right? There was this one company that had all this wonderful bags and t-shirts and stuff at ALA a few years ago. tons of stuff and they went out of business in 2 years, right? And they come in and they go. So a lot of things that in the short term look like fads are really test cases. And then they may become trends, and then they might become real change after a while. But you know what? Even the experts have a lot of trouble determining which are fads, which are trends, and which are real change. That's for sure. Anything else that you would want to put into a curriculum from this afternoon? Okay, go away. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming today, and thank you, folks. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Pat.
And
I know
again,
it's-
hope I get to hear from some of you folks online as well. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a long day, but a lot of great information I think we can all take back. And,
Great. Thank you.
I'll just remind everyone here and viewing online, I've got copies of handouts, so hopefully this is information you can also share with your colleagues and spread the word about this stuff. So thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your day.